Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Ursula Cotton was a lovely lady, approaching the winter years of her life. She was in her early 80s, but a perfect picture of supreme vital health. In those days her hair was always dyed in that quintessential purple colour, as for some reason in the 80s that was a fashionable popular look that was in vogue for the more mature woman. It was known as the blue rinse. Ursula looked fresh-faced, sprightly, young for her age, rather like a very pretty purple flower in the valley. When we asked her secret to living a long, full life, she would tell us that she had 3 secrets. Secret number 1, you needed to never indulge yourself in worry of any kind. It's such a waste of time. In my experience, seldom does anything you worry about ever materialize, she would say. Secret number 2 was to never retire. What I mean by that is find something to do that you love, pursue it with an ardent passion. Secret number 3 was to be satisfied, happy, fulfilled with your life, valuing your friendships with both family and friends. I was about 15 years old when Ursula revealed these profound longevity secrets to me, which all these years later I applied to my own life. Ursula was a woman of extraordinary panache. She always was polished, elegantly attired in zooty, stylish clothes, a slim, chic woman with one of the straightest backs I've ever seen, that always gave me the strong impression she had been a dancer at one time. She wore tweed skirts, jackets and shirts with a long string of pearls in the winter months, or in the summer she would be seen attired in a very smart pair of cotton pants with a loose tailored shirt and a smart pair of navy blue loafers. She told us that her husband Bernie, who had been the profound love of her life, had died 20 years earlier, but she still lived in the same farmhouse where she had raised her family. She had 2 adult children now, one who worked in London, England as a surgeon in Harley Street, specialising in dermatology, the other who worked in Boston as a heart surgeon. She rented out her apple orchards to a jovial apple farmer called Ellis Farmington, if I remember his name correctly, to procure an extra income for herself. Our family adored Ursula. She lived on the farm next door to ours. She had become like a quintessential member of our family. We often invited her over for lunch, tea or dinner during the week, as we always enjoyed her easygoing company, along with her dry sense of humour. One Sunday lunch we spent with Ursula has remained in my memory with such a vivid recall and clarity, as the conversation we had that Sunday afternoon left an indelible impression on my mind, one that I have never been able to forget, all these years later, and I don't even have the best memory. I do remember it was snowing quite thickly in Yakima, Washington, where our apple orchard farm was situated in the heart of the Yakima Valley, also well known for its superb wineries, and one of the cities like Tacoma, not too far away from Mount Rainier. On this particular occasion it was early December, one of the coldest months of the year for us. We were welcoming the first snow of the season. My father had a crackling fire going on in the living area, which filled the whole room with a hearty, delicious, inviting, snug warmth. We watched the fire crackling, hissing, spitting and whooshing in the grate, with its engaging, roaring orange flames that can sometimes be so magnetizing. My mother was in the kitchen preparing a Sunday lunch of roast chicken, roast potatoes, cauliflower cheese, gravy, vegetables, followed by the unforgettable apple pie she was well known for. The delicious smells of roast chicken, melted cheese, along with baked apple and cinnamon, wafted through the living room. Stomachs were beginning to rumble, growl and groan longingly, as the delectable smells titillated, teased, taunted our taste buds. My mother was a sensational cook in those days. Our lives were always surrounded by her hearty, wholesome cooking, from baked bread, cinnamon bun, to pot roasts and crisp pork crackling. Me and my 2 younger sisters were seated on the floor around the coffee table, trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle of the Eiffel Tower in France, a present given to us by my father's brother, who had recently returned from a romantic trip to Paris with his wife to celebrate their anniversary. Ursula was sitting comfortably on the white leather couch, a picture of supreme elegance, as she daintily sipped a small glass of sherry, while she talked to my father, who was drinking a glass of cider, a product produced from our own farm that was growing in popularity. "Ooh, the fire is so lovely," sighed Ursula indulgently. "I do enjoy a good fire. The smell of that roast chicken is positively making my stomach growl." "That's the problem with being married to a domestic goddess," sighed my father. "Fiona is an incredible cook. Do you know, Ursula, when I married her, I was actually only 160 pounds, 6 foot tall. Can you believe it? I was actually thin in those days. I even battled to put on weight. It seems impossible to believe that now. I remember Fiona's father came up to me after our wedding. He said to me, 'Martin, enjoy the last few weeks of your life being skinny. You've married my daughter. I'm warning you that your days of being lean and lanky have come to an end officially.' He told me he'd gone up 4 pant sizes since his daughter began to cook for him." Father patted his belly affectionately, as if it was a lovable, cuddly poodle that had grown on him. He looked at Ursula with a mischievous, cheeky grin on his face. "Tell me, Ursula, how's a man supposed to diet, reduce his calories, with smells like that wafting around the house every day? It's downright impossible, let me tell you." "So Fiona's father was absolutely right. You piled on the weight once you married his daughter." "You bet. Before I knew it, my waistline expanded and expanded. I remember being astounded." "Well, you're a well-looked-after man." "If I may say so, Martin, you carry your weight remarkably well. You don't look overweight at all." "That's very nice of you to say, Ursula. But I don't look like I'm 160 pounds any more," grinned my father. "Maybe not, Martin, but you're an exceedingly handsome man, if I may say so. You can move in here permanently, Ursula. I need someone like you to boost my ego and morale." Ursula laughed, a light musical laugh, her arctic blue eyes glancing towards the windows, looking slightly concerned, while absorbing the somewhat hypnotic view of the snowflakes fluttering to the ground like white petals falling from heaven, bespeckling the trees along with the rolling verdant turf, in beguiling sprinklings of glistening white snow. It was terribly pretty. It rather reminded me of the clouds or dustings of white powdered sugar on mincemeat pies at Christmas. Everything was beginning to look so pretty, magical, fairy tale-like. I was anticipating there would soon be enough snow to go tobogganing, or to build a snowman in the backyard, which was something we did every year. The exquisite world outside the windows of our farmhouse was slowly and surely metamorphosizing before our eyes, being swathed in carpets of white. Everyone in the family was enveloped in layers of warm clothing, while enjoying the blissful, snug, cosy warmth of the open fire. Even our yellow Labrador Snuggles and our Jack Russell Bo Peep were lying on the carpet close to the fire, snoring loudly. Little Bo Peep was caught up in a fabulously engaging dream, where she was possibly chasing a rabbit, because she kept moving her legs up and down in her dreams, making a low woof sound in the back of her throat, while everybody watching her began to laugh. "She's having some delightful dream," laughed Ursula. "I think she's chasing rabbits." "I do love the snow. It's so pretty," she continued, as she glanced out of the window. "But when it gets heavy like this, I do so worry about the poor old man." At that I looked up at Ursula in surprise. "I thought you said your husband died 20 years ago." Ursula smiled at me indulgently, as if my words had provoked some warm memories of treasured times spent with Bernie. "My husband did die about 20 years ago, Crystal. You're right there. I'm not talking about that old man. I'm talking about the wild man who lives in our wood grove. Oh, he's such a gentle giant. I've grown exceedingly fond of him over the years. He's like me, not getting any younger, I'm afraid." "What's a wild man?" I asked. "Well, he's like you or me, I suppose, but covered in hair, and very, very large. He used to have a scattering of black hair, but now it's going completely grey, bless him. I do worry about him a lot. His fine hair is not as thick as it used to be a couple of years ago. It seems to be thinning with his age, which predisposes him rather to the cold. I've seen him wearing animal skins in the winter. An added bonus is that he does know how to make a fire without matches. Last winter I insisted he sheltered down in our barn. I have a wood-burning stove in there, so it gets lovely and warm. I showed him how to operate it. He was mesmerised by the thing. He camped out there all winter with some of my blankets along with deer skins and lots of straw. He likes the softness of the hay under his skin. He was ever so grateful." "He knows how to make a fire without matches? How's that even possible?" "I've seen him do it. He rubs 2 pieces of wood together to make a fire. It's quite remarkable, really. In the winter I've often seen him standing by an open fire to keep himself warm. He burns all the broken pieces of wood lying around, cleans up the fallen debris in the woods." "Why can't you invite him over to lunch? We'd love to meet him. It would be cool if he could teach us his fire-making trick." "Heavens, no! I couldn't do that. The wild man is very evasive, painfully shy, private. He lives out in nature. Although, as I was saying, he did camp down in my barn last winter. Hopefully he'll do the same this year. He does tend to avoid human contact. I don't see him very much, but he looks out for me. He most certainly doesn't speak a word of English, but he communicates exceedingly well. Sometimes it's like I know exactly what he's saying. It's like an impression sort of develops in my mind. He kindly leaves me firewood in the winter, which he snaps up for me into little pieces with his hands. It's a huge help for me, bless his soul. Then he picks me berries in the summer for my jam making, or leaves me a leg of venison on my doorstep. Terribly kind of him. I tend to leave him a basket of goodies along with some blankets out there in the wood grove during the winter months. I like to help him. It's not easy for him when the weather turns. He's always so grateful, a real gentleman. He adores peanut butter. I don't know why he's so solitary, really. He doesn't appear to have any family members floating around. Maybe that's why he looks out for me. He sees me as a family member in a way. I can only think it's because his kind travel around a lot, migrate over long distance, rather like nomads. They possibly can't take him with them. I do worry about him on his own, but he seems perfectly contented, at peace. But this getting old malarkey, it's not easy on any of us, let me tell you. Why does he have hair on his body? My father asked Ursula. Is it some kind of physical impediment? Oh, good grief, no. I don't know how to explain it, really, but he's very different to us. Human, but not quite human. I suppose it's an adaptation thing. I mean, if you have to live in the wild, you need all your hair to keep you warm, surely. Does he have a name, this wild man? I asked Ursula. I just call him Washington. I think it suits him rather. Lunch is ready, came my mother's voice. I so regret to say that it was the end of our conversation concerning the matter of the old man, which I was always rueful in hindsight. I wish I'd probed deeper, asked Ursula more questions about him. But it's amazing what a good diversion an excellent Sunday meal can have on you, especially one cooked by my mother. I'm thinking about flying over to London next week to stay with my son in England, Ursula told us. He's invited me to spend Christmas this year with the family. I'd like to see my 2 grandchildren, who are both becoming teenagers now. It seems like only a short while ago they were in nappies, or diapers if you like. It's a constant reminder to me of my advancing age. Where does the time go to? I ask you. Are you definitely going to London? If you're not, you must spend Christmas with us like you did last year. It was so fun having you here. Thank you, Crystal. You're a little sweetheart, you are. Always so thoughtful. I enjoyed myself immensely here last Christmas, and of course your belated Thanksgiving. We had such a wonderful time. I'll let you know what my plans are. I'll have to check with my son for his itinerary. We assumed Ursula must have gone to London. It was incongruously out of character for her not to phone us to tell us her plans. My father wrongly deduced that it was easy to lose your memory when you got older, but not Ursula. She was as sharp, perspicacious and astute as an eagle. He conjectured that Ursula falsely thought she had already informed us about her plans, when she clearly had not. It was so unlike her not to contact us like this, but we genuinely reasoned it was an oversight on her part. We erroneously assumed she was staying in London with her son, deliberating that she must be having a wonderful time there with her beloved family. Little were we to realise how fallacious and amiss our conclusions were. It must have been about 2 days after our personal family Thanksgiving party, which we never had on the 25th of November like most Americans, for my father was away on that Pacific date every year in Italy, at some kind of apple symposium. So our Thanksgiving party was on the 15th of December every year. That was when we heard a loud, urgent rapping sound at our front door, as if something or someone was desperate to get our attention. It was a rude awakening for us. It was late, possibly about 2 o'clock in the early morning hours, pitch black outside, with barely any moon in sight, while clusters of twinkling silvery stars seemed obscure, faint and undiscernible, as though shrouded by mist. Everything was carpeted in a thick layer of freshly fallen white glistening snow. It was exceedingly cold out there. I could hear my father climbing reluctantly out of bed. He groaned, "What the heck? Who can be knocking at our door at this godless hour of the morning, I ask you?" I could hear him opening his closet to retrieve his dressing gown. The hangers in his closet began to rattle. My mother piped, "Bloody hell! What inconsiderate moron is waking us up at this crazy hour? It's 2:15, for goodness sake." I could hear my father's heavy footfall swiftly darting down the sweeping wooden staircase, along with the ominous sound of the door chain rattling, while the key turned in the lock. I could hear the door creaking slowly open. "Hello," I heard my father say. "Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there?" My bedroom windows from the front of the farmhouse overlooked the front door on the upper floor, so I quickly dragged myself out of my warm bed, my curiosity now aroused like a guard dog alerted to a sense that something was grievously wrong. It was like the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end, like a dog's ears standing up in attention. Someone had knocked on the door, but who at this early hour of the morning? It had to be very significant, I thought. It was freezing cold. I shivered as I was hit by the icy blasts of coldness that swept across my room like a blizzard. I trotted swiftly over to my window, smudging my nose flatly against the glass window pane, my eyes studying the ground intently below, like an owl searching furtively for a mouse. I distinguished a large trail of enormous footprints in the snow, leading directly towards our front door, in a straight line, with huge 5-foot strides. Who had feet this big, I wondered in astonishment. Fortunately, my father had switched on the outside light, so the area directly around the front door shimmered with a soft, ethereal blue luminescence. That was when I beheld a massive, solid, bulky, black, ghost-like silhouette, standing several yards away from the front door. Whatever it was absolutely enormous. My first thought was, what the heck is that? For indeed I'd never seen a creature like this before. He looked human, but not quite. There were physical influences to his appearance that were reminiscent of a mountain ape. In his huge hands he was carrying a bright pink front door that I recognised immediately as belonging to Ursula, our next-door neighbour. What was he doing with her front door in his hands, I wondered. I want to assure you the creature was bigger than that front door, equally as wide, probably wider, which made him colossal in size, weight and girth. I observed he was wearing a large bearskin around his body to keep out the extreme cold. It looked like it had been sewn together in a way, but I could see he had a scattering of long grey hair beneath it. I noticed he possessed a dome-shaped head that was slung low on his very large shoulders, overlong arms like a primate, and a distinguished human-like face. He began to howl and lament like a man that is greatly grieved. It was a distressing sound that made me aware that this man-like beast was very sorrowful, as though in the throes of a deep mourning loss. The sound was so emotionally provocative that tears began to glisten on my dark eyelashes, as I began to personally experience this creature's agonizing turmoil, almost as if it was my own. He kept directing my father's attention to the bright pink flamingo-coloured front door, placing it down directly on the snow-covered ground of the front yard. He was looking at my father with very sad and deep-set dark eyes, the colour of brown treacle. My father said in that moment he could feel the creature's extreme pain, like a shooting muscular spasm pulsating throughout his body. The creature was pointing towards Ursula's farm with his overlong arms, displaying the fleshy, well-upholstered pink underbelly of his palms that, like ours, had lifeline-like ridges. The creature grunted, turned around, gliding away across the ground from whence he'd come. Moving with such a grace, he looked as if he was floating. That was when I realized this was the old man that Ursula took under her charge, the wild man she had told us all about that Sunday afternoon. Maybe she was the one that had sewn the bearskins together for the creature. In that second I knew exactly why the wild man had brought over the pink front door. Ursula must be in some kind of trouble. This was the old man's way of signifying to us that she desperately needed our help. We thought she was in London, but maybe she'd been stuck at home all this time, caught up in a precarious situation, requiring our help all along. I could hear the front door closing behind my father. He thumped up the staircase very fast. "Fiona! Fiona! Wake up now!" he cried. "Sweetheart," moaned my mother, "please get back to bed now. Do you realise what time it is?" "You don't understand. Something's happened to Ursula. Something dreadful." "Don't be ridiculous. Ursula's in London." "I don't think so, sweetheart. I think she's been home all along." "What?" said my mother, waking up suddenly, sounding circumspect. "The old man Ursula told me about, who looks out for her. Remember I told you about him? The creature covered in grey hair. Well, he brought Ursula's pink front door to our front yard. It's lying there on the snow. I'm not sure what he is, actually. He looks like a Neanderthal, hominin, a cave dweller or something. He's like that, only with hair, and he's wearing animal skins. I think him bringing over the front door was his way of telling us that something is grievously wrong with Ursula. Martin, we need to get over there to the house at once." "Can I come, Mummy?" I said, rushing out of my bedroom, putting on my dressing gown and slippers, diving into the back seat of my father's truck. I think my parents were too shell-shocked to even protest. My sisters were thankfully fast asleep in their beds. I remember we drove at warp speed down Ursula's snow-covered long gravel drive, surrounded by orchards of apple trees, none of us saying a single word to each other. You could have cut the silence with a knife. My heart had turned to mush. My throat was dry, scratchy. I could feel my guts were squirming, for deep down in my heart I deemed instinctively that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I certainly feared the worst. Oh dear, said my mother. "Please don't let anything have happened to poor Ursula. Please, God, no. I do blame myself. We should have checked on her. We just assumed she was in London." The rubber wheels of my father's truck crunched through the snow. It was exceedingly dark. We couldn't see clearly, but we did notice there was what looked like a utility vehicle covered with snow, parked next to Ursula's black Buick, with a logo still vaguely visible on its side that later I learnt read Perfect Plumbers. It was all very suspicious. What was a strange, anomalous utility vehicle doing parked in the drive at this ungodly hour of the morning? It certainly rang alarm bells in our heads, but it looked as if it had been parked there for a number of days. What the heck was going on? It seemed like the visitor had never actually left. With bated breath, hearts thumping violently in our chests, and rising levels of adrenaline coursing through our veins, we bounded through the open door, greeted by cold draughts of the most bitterly icy air that was so cold colder than the outside even. It was like going from one ice cubicle into another that was considerably lower in temperature. My father was holding up his revolver, calling out, "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? I'm warning you, I have a revolver in my hand, and I will shoot you if you're up to any mischief." The whole house was dark, silent, ominous, oppressive. In fact, it was so dark, all we could see was the vague silhouettes of Ursula's furniture. So my father went around placing the lights on in all the rooms. We all screamed when we found Ursula shackled to a chair in the living room, her hands and feet tied together with cord. Her pale skin so white, she looked exactly like a doll. Her blue eyes were vacant and empty. She was dead. Someone had shot her in the head at point-blank range. I could see the dried blood on the side of her head. It looked like a perfectly neat shot, as if the shooter had cocked his rifle on her temple to blow out her brains. We could hardly believe it. Her body had frozen like a block of ice, as the freezing air came blasting through the house, had literally frozen her solid, halting the decay of Ursula's body quite significantly. Someone had willfully retarded the decomposition process by even switching on the air conditioning unit in her house, which is why we felt as if we were traipsing through the frozen Siberian wilderness. Her body felt hard like a rock, almost as if she'd been placed in a freezer. She could have been dead for quite some time. I rushed outside to the bushes to get violently sick. My mother was sobbing, "Oh, I can't believe this has happened. Oh," while me and my father were so deadened, benumbed, momentary suspended in an altered state, probably as a coping mechanism to handle the bizarre events unfolding before us like a horror movie. We were operating like robots as everything began to feel so surreal. I walked back to Ursula's house in a different direction, passing the right-hand side of the plumber's van, which we hadn't yet investigated or even searched. My father was now calling the police on Ursula's landline on the oak table in her entrance hall at the time. I stopped dead in my tracks. I was in the dark, using my father's torch that he had handed me. I noticed that the door to the plumber's vehicle was wide open. There was snow lining the interior. It had collected and gathered together in a large heap. I began to run my torch over the interior of the vehicle. My blood froze over. I let out a huge, deafening scream, "Ah!" when I noticed something so horrific it caused me to freeze up like a statue. I was unable to digest what I was perceiving. Surely this could not be real. Both my parents came bolting out towards me. "What the heck is the matter? You scared the hell out of us, Crystal. What's going on?" I pointed to the open van. My father quickly flashed his torch in the dark interior of the car. I saw his eyes widen, his jaw drop open in astonishment, as the decapitated head of what I assumed was the plumber was sitting on the driver's seat, rather like a large ostrich head, next to the steering wheel. It was so nightmarish, eerie, morose, morbid, menacing, like something you would see in a hideously macabre, lugubrious movie. The head almost looked fake, rather like a horrific mannequin or gruesome, grotesque prop used by Universal Studios for a shockingly graphic murder scene. Only this was the real deal. On the ground there was a snow-covered leather bag, lying half open, filled with thousands of dollars that was falling out of the bag, along with pieces of Ursula's jewellery. There were a couple of diamond rings, her attractive Cartier watch, a couple of gold necklaces, a few strings of pearls. We all knew at once what the motive for Ursula's murder was. It was staring at us blindly in the face like the bright headlights of a car. My heart sank like the sun dipping over the horizon. It was common knowledge in our town. Ursula did not trust any of the banks. She made no secret of this fact, which was her greatest faux-pas, or oversight if you like. She kept a large stash of cash under her mattress. My father had always told her that this was a big gaffe on her part, that could potentially end up costing her life. He hadn't been joking. He told her that if a greedy person found out her secret, that she would be in big trouble. It seemed his warning words had been consummated. He went to check her bedroom for the cash she had hidden under her bed. It was missing. It was clearly all packed away in that leather bag in the snow, next to the plumber's van. We were to find the plumber's body lying in the back of the truck, like a lumpy sleeping bag. "No surprises for guessing what the monster was after," said my father, his face now a picture of rage. We put the pieces of the puzzle together, perceiving that Ursula was held up by this plumber for cash, but in order for him not to have any witnesses to his insidious, duplicitous, wicked crime, he had shot her at point-blank range in the temple. "I think the old man killed the plumber," said my father. "Good on him. Don't you dare mention the old man to the sheriff when he comes around. We don't want him to get into trouble. I think he discovered the plumber had killed Ursula. It would have taken nothing for him to decapitate the man. The size of that creature is phenomenal." We waited for the sheriff to arrive. It was a long morning. I could see him shedding a couple of tears. "I knew Ursula exceedingly well," he told us. "A delightful woman. My grandfather rarely had a thing for her. No prizes for guessing why she was murdered like this. You know, she would tell me over and over again that banks could not be trusted. Now look what's happened to her. I warned her about this. I had a horrible feeling that something like this could turn out to happen to her. And it has." "Do you know the plumber, Sheriff?" my father asked. "Yes, it's Timothy Wilson. He'd been having money problems for quite some time. Not a nice character. Always getting into trouble with the law. Served a prison sentence about 5 years ago for a shootout. I do not know who decapitated him like this. It's a bizarre mystery how the murderer ends up being murdered, but I shall not be shedding any tears for him, I can assure you of that. Good news, I found the murder weapon in his truck, there in the cubbyhole in the front. I can see it was used to shoot Ursula, even without the medical examiner's report." Moments later, the medical examiner arrived on the scene, taking photographs before Ursula's body was finally placed into a van and then taken to the morgue for a full post-mortem. But everyone knew the cause of death was a gunshot to the head. When the medical examiner saw the decapitated head of the plumber on the car seat, she couldn't make sense of any of it, or who had done this to the plumber. I remember her words to the sheriff were, "Sheriff, it looks like the head has been plucked off the neck, like an apple from a tree. But no human would have the strength to do that. I'm not sure what to say in my report. This is a very enigmatic case indeed, but I'm not complaining one bit. That's why I love my job. I enjoy the mystery of my cases, the curious questions that can never be fathomed. This is a very, very fascinating death." "Then there is the question of Ursula's front door," piped the sheriff. "I'd like to know what the hell happened to it. I can see it's been removed from its hinges, as if someone just pulled it off in one piece. Now that is extraordinary." "Oh, we found it on our front yard after we received a knock on the door," my father told the sheriff. "That was when we checked on Ursula. We discovered she was dead." "This is a very baffling, enthralling case," said the sheriff. "More questions than answers. But at least we know now why Ursula was murdered." I don't know any more details about the case or the medical examiner's report, as I was only 15 at the time. Ursula's funeral was a big deal in town. Among all the people that had loved her, many tears were shed. We decided to have the wake at our home, with lots of snacks and drinks. She had a very moving send-off. Colourful hot air balloons were released into the blue sky. Ursula was buried in a local graveyard. The good news is that both her sons were at the funeral, along with their wives and children. Ursula would have been over the moon about that. My father said he could see the signs that the old man had indeed been using the barn to keep warm throughout the winter. He found skins, hay and blankets on the floor there, as well as the wood-burning stove had clearly been recently used. It turned out that she had declined her son's invitation to go to London, as she told him she didn't fancy the long flight. It was decided that the family would visit her the following year, but that never arose. We never saw the hairy old man again, that I know all these years later was most definitely a Bigfoot, who I believed loved Ursula. I'm so impressed he brought along the pink front door to announce to us that she was in trouble. I do not believe that the police ever found out that the plumber was actually murdered by a Sasquatch. Seriously, I have no regrets about that whatsoever. Some secrets are indeed best left shrouded in mystery. I don't believe Ursula would ever have been killed if she'd kept her money in a bank. But speaking about her distrust of banks was her biggest oversight. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, The first time I told my mother that I was gay, it went down like a lead balloon, or like an explosion in the house. Not very well, I'm afraid. I shall never forget her thunderstruck, startled expression. It spoke volumes. It was so clear to me by her flawed, flabbergasted reaction to my shocking out-of-the-blue announcement that even during my childhood, when I'd never shown the slightest interest in dolls, wanted to play with cars, toy guns, water pistols all the time, that it had never even fleetingly crossed her mind for a single brief second that her only daughter might just be gay. Perhaps she didn't want to see what was staring at her in plain sight, like a blinding bright light that you cannot fail to overlook. I'm afraid my parents liked to deceive themselves when it came to their own children. It would seem that entertaining the idea that their only child might just be different was not something they were eager to welcome. My mother sat there on the couch, twiddling her fingers awkwardly, her body trembling, looking at me as if I was a ghost, her mouth hanging wide open like a Venus flytrap, her eyes growing round with astonishment. You're a lesbian?" she said, looking absolutely appalled, as if the word lesbian was so repulsive, so offensive to her, that she wanted to hurl up the contents of her own stomach. But to be polite, she was wantingly restraining herself from making that quintessential urgent trip to the toilet. I don't understand. I thought you liked that boy. What's his name? Walter MacArthur. Now, he was a sweet boy. Such a gentleman. So perfect for you. That was all an act, Mother, for your benefit. I never liked him. Well, I did, but not in that way. I didn't want anyone to know I was gay at the time. I was so embarrassed, ashamed of being different. Now, Mother, I realise I need to be true to myself. I can't pretend to be something I'm not. That's why I needed to tell you the truth. Otherwise, you'd be in denial as much as I am. I really feel that the truth does set you free. I need to unburden the heavy load I've been carrying around for so long. "But why?" said my mother, her eyes misting over with tears. "He was such a nice boy, so handsome, so clever, so polite, so perfect for you in every way. You made such a delightful couple, you really did. It's such a dreadful waste, an awful shame. Mum, I like girls, that's why. I've never fancied men. There's nothing wrong with Walter. You're right, he's a nice dude. I acknowledge that. But I could never ever be interested in him. It's nothing personal. I'm really sorry if it distresses you, but there's not much I can do about it. I can't change myself to be what you want me to be. I've been doing that all my life, and where has that ever got me? You know how your father would react if he knew your dreadful secret. It would break his heart. We had such high hopes for your future, Philomena. We had dreams of you getting married, having babies. Now it's like all those fantasies are shattered, ripped to pieces like shredded tissue paper. Your father and I were looking so forward to having grandbabies." My mother began to sob. "Now I will never be a grandmother," she blubbered, as if it was the most devastating thing that she could ever contemplate. "I can still do those things, Mother, have babies, raise a family. Maybe not in the conventional way, but there is no reason why I couldn't have a baby of my own. You could still be a grandparent, so please stop crying. You'll get your grandchild. I'm pretty sure of that. By the way, don't call me Philomena. I can't bear it when you do that. Call me Phil. I much prefer that." My mother looked mortified. "If you had a baby, it wouldn't grow up with a proper father. A child needs a male role model in his life. You can't fulfill that role for your child, not in any way. By the way, Phil's a boy's name. I don't want to call you that. I love your name, Philomena. It's so feminine, so pretty, so classy. Mum, do I look like a girl to you? When did I last wear a dress? When did I grow my hair long or wear a stitch of makeup? Tell me that. Did I ever play with dolls when I was a kid? I was the ruffian climbing trees, kicking a soccer ball around with the next-door neighbour's boys. Surely a tiny part of you must have wondered if I was gay. Even your friend asked you once if I was a boy. Remember, or has that memory conveniently eradicated itself from your mind? I always thought you were just a tomboy. Lots of young girls are rough when they're young, acting like tomboys all the time, but they're not gay. I never imagined you were a lesbian. You do know that the Bible does not condone two women being together. It's a sin, a grievous sin in the sight of God. Mum, much as I appreciate what the Holy Book has to say about being gay, I'm not about to live a lie, not for anyone. You have to accept me as I am. Have any of your friends actually ever asked you if I was gay? Mrs. Watson did once. She asked me if you were a lesbian, but she's a very annoying, blunt woman. I thought her offensive, suggesting you were that way inclined. It was remarkably rude of her. Well, she was possibly saying, Mother, what all your friends are secretly thinking, but are too polite to say. Most young people know instinctively I'm gay. It's not a big deal to them. It's acceptable these days. In my day, it was highly frowned upon. It's ridiculous. Do you know these days they're asking little kids if they're interested in gender reassignment? What is the world coming to? Dear, oh dear. I can't imagine how confused I would be at 6 if my mother called me to one side and said, Elizabeth, are you sure you want to be a girl? Shall I buy you a water pistol instead of a doll? Mother, I'm sure it isn't as blatant as that these days, but I agree with you. Things have gone a little too far, too extreme. A kid at 6 certainly doesn't have a clue what it wants to be. I didn't feel gay until I was 19 years old. That was when I realised I wasn't interested in boys at all. In time, my parents successfully masqueraded to me that they had come around to my being gay. But it was something they feigned and purported not to be true, even though it was staring them boldly in the face, rather like a fly buzzing around them in a frenzy that they refused to swat, by pretending to themselves that it wasn't really there, even though it was bugging them madly. My mother even kidded herself that I'd grow out of this tumultuous, turbulent phrase like a baby going through teething. I would finally come around to the error of my ways, she thought. She'd called the pastor around to talk to me about my shameful, ignominious problem. It had been a cringe-making, uncomfortable conversation, one that, when I think about it today, still makes me flush from the memory. Your mother tells me that you think you're a lesbian, Philomena, he told me with such a grim, objectionable expression on his affronted face. Anyone would think that I was responsible for bombing a building, or something equally as treacherous. It's Phil, Pastor, I corrected. I don't think I'm a lesbian. I know I am. You do know the Bible considers it an abomination for two women to be together. God made man and woman. He made Adam, and then he removed a rib to make Eve. He did not create two women to be together, but he made a man and a woman to be together. That is natural. What do you want me to do, Pastor? Pretend to be something I'm not? If I had a one-way direct line to God, I would ask him why he made me this way. I like women, so get over it. It's pretty commonplace these days. It's not my fault if he made me this way. It's not normal. A lot of things aren't normal, Pastor. My friend has a dog that hangs around with a pig all day. The pig thinks he's a dog. Now that's not normal. I think you will find this is a very different scenario, Philomena. I would be very grateful if you would read these passages of the Bible, he said, scribbling them down on a piece of paper. Meditate, pray on them. God has the power to deliver you from your licentious, risque affliction. I will get the church to pray for your deliverance from this moral, lascivious depravity that has definitely ensnared your soul. The pastor told my mother that the church would be praying for me. They did, but regretfully I remained a hardened lesbian, failing to wake up in the morning transformed into a brand new woman that liked men. They were both bitterly disappointed. Now more to the point, all about me. I consider myself to be pretty good-looking, in a masculine sort of way. I really do look rather like a dude. although of course you can tell that I'm not. I have spiky dark hair, blue eyes, quite a masculine physique that has taken some lengthy workouts to attain. I could give other men a run for their money. The trouble is I like feminine girls. Those ones are hard to find. I don't have the vast pool of choice that men have to fish from. They're fishing in a vast ocean, while I'm throwing out my line into a tiny pond known as the lesbian community. There are a lot of lesbians that look exactly like myself. I hardly want to date a look-alike or be kissing someone that looks exactly like me. That would be exceedingly unfortunate. I visited many lesbian parties, social events, struggling to meet the kind of girl that I'm actually looking for. I've seen women I rarely like, attractive rarely, but they're annoyingly as straight as a pencil. Most are unwilling to experiment with a woman that looks like a man, but isn't actually one. I would not want to date them anyway, as these women are only interested in the real thing. They want angel delight, not a mock version of it. I've been through a string of lesbian women. The one I really liked turned out to be a nymphomaniac. It seemed she was keeping every other girl's bed warm at night, not just mine. I dated a bisexual girl once too. That was the worst experience of my entire life. I fell for her hard, hook, line and sinker. Then she started dating a dude. That was catastrophic. It was the most emasculating experience of my entire life. He was a Navy Marine, tall, masculine, ripped. How could I begin to compete with that, unless I took a course of steroids, moved into the gym permanently, barely stopping to draw breath in between workouts, along with heavy, unbearable weightlifting sessions that would drain the life out of me like a suction hoover. So for me, bisexual women aren't even on the cards. They're fickle, flaky, unreliable as the day is long. Now that's not to say that that is true in every case. I wouldn't wish to offend anyone. But let's just say that this is my personal experience in regards to the matter. One day while I was in the bar having a draught of beer, I saw a beautiful girl. My heart began to flip-flop when I noticed her. I knew that she was exactly what I was looking for in a woman. She ticked all the boxes on the surface. The trouble was that every eye in the place was focused on her as well. Everyone was interested in exactly the same girl. I knew that I had a sea of competitors, all champing at the bit for her affections, so I didn't waste a moment in time. I made a bold, brave, decisive, determined beeline directly towards her. I puffed up my chest, clenched in my stomach muscles tight, to appear as large as I possibly could. I ambled towards her with a very confident masculine strut. I came straight to the point when I approached her, preparing myself for rejection, but thankfully it never came. She studied me with curious eyes. Her pale, flawless skin flushed pink. This was a very good sign. "Would you like to come out to dinner with me?" I asked her, getting straight to the point. To my amazement, she nodded shyly. I think she liked my cocky, direct manner, which on my part was a big macho act. I could see the disappointed look in other people's eyes as she finally linked arms with me. As we left the bar together, I certainly felt like the cat that had got all the cream. I felt as if I was on top of the world. We went to a really lovely restaurant for dinner. I didn't even notice what I was eating. I couldn't stop staring at her. I couldn't believe how fortunate I was to have such a gorgeous woman sitting opposite me. I'm sure the people in the restaurant were thinking, what is she doing with a lesbian? But I didn't care. Her name was Madeline McCarthy. She had long dark hair, pale skin, with the most feminine nose, pretty slim lips, a neck as graceful as a swan, green eyes, and a very slender feminine physique. She wore an emerald green dress, along with a pair of stylish black stilettos that brought out the sheen of her dark hair, along with the colour of her pretty beguiling eyes. The trouble with the young woman was she was quite introvert, timorous, reticent like a church mouse. She didn't say much to me all evening. The meal was filled with awkward, uncomfortable, apprehensive silences, which I tried to clumsily fill in with comments about the difficult, tumultuous time that I had getting my parents to accept my being gay. She nodded effusively, as if she understood everything I was saying, but she withheld any comments. It meant I literally knew nothing at all about her. Maybe the mystery that swaddled her in a silken cocoon of intrigue fascinated me all the more, made her all that more beguiling. I figured with time she'd finally come out of her shell, with a little encouragement, that is. like a tortoise being titillated by a crunchy carrot, so I didn't allow it to discourage me. For now, I decided I would do all the talking. I invited Madeline camping with me. I thought it would be the quintessential best way to unlock the shy girl buried beneath the pretty veneer. The girl I desperately wanted to get to know better, that I was sure was as bewitching, captivating, and intoxicating underneath, even more than her enticing physical appearance. We could go on hikes together, camp under the stars, sit by a crackling fire. It would be so romantic. I was thrilled that she loved the idea of going camping. We were both Californians, so it made sense to organise a trip to Jeddah Smith's Redwood Park. I'd never been there before, but I heard on good authority that we would be very pleased with this park. I was cautiously driving my parents' RV down the Howland Hill Road, which is a 6-mile gravel road that climbs steeply into the depths of the park. My rubber tyres were crunching the pebbles, which pelted the undercarriage quite briskly with tapping sounds. Shortly after cresting or reaching the top of the road, you pass this remarkable cluster of uninterrupted old-growth monster redwood trees that are so enticing they consume all your attention, render you completely speechless. You will be blown away, transfixed, mesmerized by their majesty, regal splendor, awe-inspiring wonder that these natural giants of nature will evoke in you. For a start, the stupendous size of the redwoods is very hard to fathom until you see them for yourselves. They truly are giants, with gargantuan burly trunks that tower into the sky like majestic skyscrapers. You can almost damage your neck if you look up towards the canopy. The forest is so lush, electric green, colourful. The texture of the bark is absolutely enthralling. You can't help yourself but run your hands down the rugged, long vertical ridges that glide down the trunk with deep grooves in the spaces. Madeline and I could not help ourselves but put little prayers on paper, tucking them into the depths of the tree like they do at the Wailing Wall in Israel. It seemed like a sure fine way of getting a direct line to God, or to a higher power if you like. My note said, "Dear God, may I find out if Madeline is the one for me this weekend?" We also took a selfie together under a giant redwood. I felt like an ant against the vast contours of the tree. Inconspicuous, tiny by contrast. It was amazing how small and insignificant the trees could make you feel. This graceful, prominent road provides fabulous idyllic views of the lush vegetation from the ravine below, as it descends ever downwards to a thriving, profuse, otherworldly landscape that gives you the distinct sense that you are exclusively alone in a phenomenal, magical bubble, separated completely from the outside world. It truly feels as if this luxuriant forest caresses you with a gentle reassurance, almost as if the old souls of the grandiose trees, along with their inherent wisdom, are watching over you with a love that transcends time and space. The thriving hillsides on either side of the road are framed by an abundance of pretty lacy ferns and verdant underbrush. Then there is the pretty delicate light that trickles through the forest canopy, brightening up all the flourishing greens of the forest to a vibrancy that is almost electric. I must say I was so glad we had come in the RV. There were muddy pools of water from the deluge caused by the recent rain showers all over the forest, which meant that it possessed that quintessential after-rain smell, which enhanced the subtle, spicy, earthy undertones of the redwood trees all the more. We found the perfect place to park the RV under a redwood tree in a camping site permitted by the park. I could see there were a couple of other campers parked further away. Nobody had hitched up a tent. It wouldn't be good to do that with so much bad weather around and lots of water. The weather forecast had predicted more showers. It didn't matter at all for us, as it was cosy to sit in the RV and talk. I prepared a fire pit outside our camper. Before long we were grilling steaks, frankfurters, burgers over the grill. Madeline prepared a Cobb salad, along with a salad containing watermelon and feta cheese. We ate everything outside, staring into the crackling flames of the fire pit, enjoying the delicious tastes of outdoor food, washed down with cold glasses of Mountain Dew. "I don't know much about you, Madeline. How many lesbians have you dated?" I asked. "You're the first. I've never dated a lesbian before. Not until now, that is." My heart sank. This wasn't what I wanted to hear. "But you are a lesbian, are you not?" I asked. "You are attracted to women, are you not?" "I think so. I was raised by 2 lesbian mothers. It's all I've ever known. It's what I'm comfortable with." "But have you dated men?" I asked. "Of course," she said, "but I feel more at ease with women. That's why I believe I must be gay. I'm not so relaxed in male company as I am with you." "You sound rather confused to me." "Well, that's exactly what my gay parents keep telling me. They're both lesbian. They say I'm at home with women because I've only ever been around female energy. I would be more comfortable with men, they think, if I spent more time around them." "Do your gay parents actually think you're lesbian?" "No, they don't, but I'm sure I must be. I feel as if I am lesbian. I mean, I like you a lot. That's got to mean something, surely." "When you say you like me, are you physically attracted to me?" I asked her. Madeline looked awkward. "I wouldn't say I'm attracted to your physique. I mean, I prefer a man's physique. You're quite small, really. I mean, you're biggish for a woman, I suppose, but compared to a man, you're pretty puny. I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. It's just the way it is. You couldn't possibly be as big as a man, even if you tried." My heart sank. "You've just told me that you're attracted to a male physique, not mine. In my opinion, that is a big deal. That really does suggest to me that you do prefer men." "No, you're wrong. I like your energy, your personality. You're really cool, Phil. I mean that." "I'm not sure that's enough. It would be rather nice if you found me physically irresistible." "Doesn't that sort of thing grow with time?" she asked. "I'm not sure it does," I said, trying to change the subject quickly. I could see the potential of having a long-lasting relationship with Madeline flying out the window very fast, like a hot air balloon taking flight. I didn't want that hot air balloon to get away, but Madeline not finding me attractive was exceedingly hard to digest. It hit me in the face like a brick. It also did make me wonder if she was in fact a lesbian. "I tell you what," she said. "How about we take a late afternoon hike? It would be good to stretch our legs, get some fresh air." "Yes, but it could get dark soon. I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Don't be ridiculous. It's easily redeemed. We can wear our head torches. Lots of people walk at night. There's nothing wrong with it at all. Go on, it'll be fun." I must admit, after our awkward conversation, the very idea of some fresh air certainly appealed to me. But I wasn't ecstatic about the idea of being caught up in the darkness, especially with all the muddy pools of water lying precariously scattered around the place. If one wasn't too vigilant, we could easily slip. But I didn't want to look like a wuss. I was desirous for the seemingly muddled, rather confused woman to still find me attractive. The last thing I wanted was for her to assume I was afraid of the dark. That would make me look pathetic. "My mother has an old Indian friend," I said, "who said if white people knew exactly what goes on in the hours of darkness, they would never dare venture out at all." "I don't believe in any of that stuff. Come on, let's go. Anyone would think you were secretly afraid of the dark, Phil." So armed with our lamps on our heads, along with our hiking boots and waterproof anoraks, we ambled down the trail, which was wet with vast pools of water like miniature ponds strewn across the path. So we decided to walk along a grassy verge instead, covered with ferns adjacent to the path, as the ground cover had absorbed a lot of the rain there. Even though the underbrush was thick beneath our feet, we were much less likely to slip on dense vegetation. Well, so we thought. Although it was not unaffected, of course, by the torrential rainfall, it was still very wet. We never realised that this was a very foolish decision for us to make. We had no comprehension how dark it would ultimately get, how easy it would be to lose our way. The sun set over the valley, dappling everything in a mesmerising ethereal golden haze that shimmered over the lush green underbrush, making everything sparkle, twinkle, glitter in the dimming, subtle luminescence of the early evening. It was a prepossessing fairy tale night, with the pretty sounds of crickets and frogs filling the air, with their captivating chorus of song that always reminds me of happy summer evenings in the wilderness. We held hands as we talked, but then suddenly, as fast as a light being flicked off at the switch, everything became incredibly dark. I wish I could say the light of the moon as well as the stars offered us some illumination, but sadly on this illustrious occasion, the ambiguous constellations of the Milky Way seemed somewhat obscure, shrouded even by a foggy haze that eclipsed and vanquished the light, so that the darkness was quite profound. If it weren't for our head torches, we would barely be able to see our hands in front of our faces. The walk lost its appeal. Its prepossessing pleasure now morphed into a noose around our necks. I tried desperately to disguise the angst, disquietude, and trepidation I was feeling, but it was rising in my gut. I could feel my insides squirming as they pulverized into mush. I suddenly felt nauseously sick, like I wanted to vomit. I secretly perceived that I didn't have a clue where the heck we were. Madeline was looking at me for guidance, as if she assumed I knew the way. I kept reassuring her that I did, but it was all a big laddish act on my part. "Are you sure you know where we are?" she said, looking rather anxious. "Pretty sure," I lied. "I don't know why, Phil, that you had to encourage us to go trekking in the dark like this, walking way off the beaten path. It was an insane idea of yours. You must have known we'd get lost, surely." "Well, I seem to remember, Madeline, that this walk was your suggestion. I was the one that proposed we stayed in the RV. But no, you wouldn't listen. You had better ideas. You persuaded me that a walk would be fun. Or has your memory conveniently failed you?" "All I'm saying, Phil, is you shouldn't have encouraged me. You should have known better," she said, snatching her hand away from me angrily. "You should have had more common sense. You're supposed to be the sensible one, taking charge of things. I'm whimsical. You should have known that." "I only went along with your idea because I wanted to make you happy, Madeline." "Happy? Do I look like I'm happy? I'll have you know I've never been more miserable in my entire life. I'm wet, freezing cold, scared, and it's all your fault. You should have put your foot down. You should have known it wouldn't have been safe in the dark. Anything could be out here, absolutely anything, just like that Indian friend told your mother. Something could be watching us right now. Something could be waiting to pounce on us. Maybe there's a skinwalker out there," she said, looking at me with alarmed eyes growing bigger every second. "It feels like something very evil is watching us. I feel it in my gut. It's freaking the hell out of me." "What's a skinwalker?" "I'm not sure, but it's something you don't want to encounter. I know that much. I think it's a shapeshifter of some kind." "Sounds positively lovely. You're making things far worse for us, Madeline, with your imagination going overboard like this. Just relax, take a deep breath, you'll feel a lot better." In seconds, the sounds of the crickets and frogs evaporated, just like the steam from a kettle, until the sound completely dissipated. All we could hear was a slight gentle breeze blowing in the wind. Beyond that, everything was soundless, deathly silent, apart from the crunching and the snapping sounds of our rubber-soled walking boots pressing the underbrush. Moments later, we both got the overwhelming, incomprehensible feeling that we were not alone, that we were being watched and studied. The ominous feeling sent chills down our spine, putting the fear of God into every single cell of our bodies. Madeline looked alarmed. Something's watching us, I know it. It's a predator of some kind. I don't know what we can do. Supposing it kills us." "Don't be so dramatic, Madeline," I said, trying to act like I was confident, but feeling anything but. "We're getting close to the path, I know it. Before you say Jack Robinson, we'll be drinking cups of cocoa in the RV, laughing about this, realising we got ourselves into a huge tiz about nothing. Remind me never ever to go walking at night like this with you. That Indian friend of your mother's is absolutely right. There are things out here at dark, menacing things. I can feel them everywhere. I know something's watching us. I feel so scared. Really, really scared." I cannot begin to describe to you how utterly intimidating it is to walk around a redwood forest at night, with ghostly, menacing shadows dancing through the trees. It felt as if behind every large tree something was loitering, something threatening and bodeful, that was watching us with nefarious intent. That was when we heard the most horrifying growl. It was the most discomposing sound that I have ever yet to hear. "I told you," cried Madeline. "I told you. There's something there. It's coming to get us. I know it is." Then we saw him. He glided towards us on 2 powerful legs. At first he looked like a sultry, giant, dark figure, moving gracefully through the trees, swinging his arms backwards and forwards. But as his feet hit the forest floor, it was as if the ground thundered like a booming drum, or like a herd of bison charging by at an enormously great speed, siphoning up the dirt, beating, pounding, walloping the earth with a mighty force. The sound was exactly like that, but much more airy. It felt like we were about to be charged by an angry bull elephant. It left us in no doubt that this creature's intention towards us was deadly. Me and Madeline screamed as the creature came tearing towards us. My heart was beating at 100 miles an hour. I thought I would run away, but for a moment my mind was hijacked by the astonishment of the experience. It seemed so surreal, so outer-worldly. I suppose you could say I was stunned into submission, almost as if I had been tasered by a police officer, rendered helpless. Indeed, I became so disorientated I was almost convinced I was dreaming. Perhaps it was a good thing we didn't run. Madeline looked like a stone statue, frozen to the spot, her petrified expression fixed, her mouth open, her eyes widened in horror. The creature moved closer towards us, standing only yards away, looking at us with venomous hatred, eyes that were blazing red like traffic lights. We could tell at once it was a Bigfoot. This thing was monstrously huge. There are no words on earth to describe the size of this thing. Imagine something as tall and as wide as your front door, shaped like a human, covered in hair, with longer arms than a human, and a cone-shaped head that flows seamlessly into the shoulders. The creature's face was covered in thick black hair that covered its head until the brow line. The rest of the face was covered in a leathery, dark, shiny skin. Its nose was fat, its cheekbones high, its jawline square. I assure you, I think facing a bull elephant would have been infinitely more preferable to facing this thing. It was so intimidating, so angry, so vengeful, so hateful. The creature stood there glaring at us. He growled at us viciously, exposing a threatening mouthful of glistening white teeth. I physically jumped out of my skin. I was pretty sure we were going to die. The creature roared. That roar, oh my word, I cannot even describe it. Believe me, you never want to hear a sound as intimidating as that. It hits you so hard, like a knife in the guts. It almost goes through you. I was trembling so much, but something told me to speak to that creature. I don't know what it was, but I just followed that instinct. I said, "I'm sorry, sir, for intruding on your space. I do realize we've trespassed on your land. It was so dark, we went for a walk. The trail we went on was so wet, we thought we'd walk on the brush instead to avoid slipping. We got hopelessly lost. It was so dark, we couldn't see clearly. We cannot find our way back. We're really sorry. We've lost our way." I don't know how to explain this to you, nor can I fathom what happened, but the creature completely calmed down and composed himself. He moved his head to one side, and then to the other. He looked directly into my eyes. I swear to you, he knew exactly what I was saying. I promise you there is no exaggeration in the statement. He snorted, then indicated for us to follow him. He led us directly to the path that we were originally on. We found our way back to the RV. The creature turned around, glided away. Once we were back in the RV, Madeline began to shout at me. "We could have been killed! That monster could have killed us! It's all your fault!" But he didn't. That's besides the point. If you hadn't spoken to him, he would have killed us. He was so angry. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Take me home now. Do you know what this is? This is a sign to me. A sign that we were never meant to be together. You're right. You're way too neurotic for me. Do you know what? I asked God in that tree to reveal to me whether we were meant to be together. And we're not. That's clear. One thing is he answered my prayer. That all happened 8 years ago. Madeline discovered she was not gay after all. Married a guy who is a very affluent engineer, I gather. I can't say I feel that I lost out on her company. I was to soon learn that the cover doesn't always match the inside. I'm still looking for that perfect woman to rock my world. I haven't met her yet, but I know she's out there, someone. I'm always optimistic about that. Word of advice, perhaps you shouldn't go walking at night in the national forest. You might encounter something you would rather avoid. It turns out that Indian was absolutely right. White people, when they venture out into the night, they have no clue what is out there. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it wasn't an easy decision to make, running away from home, but living with our bipolar mother had become unbearable for me and Malcolm. Now, I'm not putting a damper on bipolar disorder by any manner of means, but it affects everyone differently. In my mother's case, it was an insufferable psychological condition. Hers was extreme, driving our entire family completely insane. It really was like living with an uncontrollable wild dog that we could not restrain, especially when she became overexcitable, rambunctious and frenzied. The pendulum with my mother swang so recklessly, rather like a grandfather clock, to the left and then to the right, to such a radical extreme. The only way I can describe it was almost like going from an icy cold Arctic wilderness to a red, dry, hot desert in a matter of days. It wasn't easy to climatize to such dramatic swings in my mother's temperament and mood. It would seem that there was no middle ground for her. Unbeknownst to us, although to be fair we did have our sneaky suspicions, she was secretly throwing her lithium tablets down the toilet. They deadened her, made her feel like the nectar of life had been sucked out of her, like a hummingbird lapping up all the honey, leaving behind an empty vessel. My mother felt like that empty vessel. She couldn't abide living like that. It made her feel less than alive. When it came to my father, there is no delicate way to put this, other than to say that he was as elusive and evasive as the Scarlet Pimpernel. He had the quintessential habit of only ever arriving on the scene when my mother was in a good mood. But he always mysteriously vanished from our home when she was on one of her doleful downers. I'm not certain where my father actually went, but he would disappear sometimes for days at a time so as not to be on the receiving end of my mother's despondent melancholia or abasement. Although he loved her very much, he couldn't handle the morose bouts of clinical depression that robbed our lives of the perfect balance and harmony we all desperately craved. When she was in a good mood, he would magically reappear like the sunshine on a rainy day. He would be so pleased to see my mother when she was buzzing around with joyfulness. My brother had a sneaky suspicion that he had another love squirreled away for the days when my mother was engaged in her gloomy doldrums. We could never judge him for that, for living with my mother was not a pleasurable experience, whatever way you looked at it. If having an affair brought him some measure of comfort, then all well and good as far as we were concerned. When my mother was on a high, it was like she was hyped up on adrenaline, like a frenzied bee buzzing around a can of sweet cola excitedly. You could be forgiven for assuming she was taking drugs, but this was never the case. She became so hyperactive, her emotions would flip-flop all over the place with ludicrous ideas that she believed would radically change the world. She would jump around like a frog darting from one activity to another with a feverish, intense passion that was always unbridled. But when the pendulum hit rock bottom again, she slipped into a deep, woeful depression, like a weighty stone plummeting to the bottom of a dark lake. When the school bus dropped us off at the top of our street, we would trek home, entering the house, feeling the blue funk of oppression. It was like a storm cloud brewing over the horizon that was threatening to cause a chaotic storm. Even our cat Moonshine would have the sense to do a runner from the house at fraught, cheerless times like this. She could sense my mother's despondent, pessimistic mood spiralling ever downwards. That cat would wisely be gone faster than a flash of lightning, and much like my father, would always magically reappear when things were changed. We had our suspicions that old Rosie Darlington, that lived next door to us, was feeding Moonshine. She was a highly intuitive cat. You could feel the heaviness in our house, which is why we never brought friends home. For when we did in the olden days, they would make comments about my mother. "What's wrong with her?" they'd say. "She's seriously weird." We always found that my mother's melancholia hung around the home like a thick blanket of dread, cloaking the entire household in an insufferable gloomy lugubriosity. My mother would be seated on the living room couch in a pair of bright pink gym pants with a loose flowing cotton top, her long wispy hair falling away from her brown ponytail. Her eyes would be rimmed by inflamed pink contours of skin, revealing that she'd been crying quite substantially. Her eyes would look bloodshot. I remember she smoked like a chimney, shaking nervously, unrestrained tears pouring down her cheeks in long, unceasing streams. The most distressing thing about these bouts of sorrowfulness for us was that she could not even fathom the source of her despair. She would sometimes snap out of those tears, becoming belligerent and incensed. Me and my brother became her punching bag. She would take out her grievous feelings on us, as misery always loves company. She would invariably blame us for all her troubles and woes, as if in some way we were responsible or accountable for her abjection. Sometimes she convinced us that we were the source of all her pain, but my father always assured us that this was not the case. "Bipolar is enigmatic," he said. "It's not easy to understand, but you children are not the cause of your mother's tearlessness, that I assure you." There were times when it felt like we were trying to save a drowning woman, but as we tried so desperately to save our mother, she pulled us down under the water with her, drowning us as well. It seemed like the weight of her despair literally sucked us dry. "Mum," I would say to her, "did you take your lithium tablets today? You know you need to take them. It's very, very important. If you don't, you're going to feel very down." "I took my tablets," my mother would insist, but I always knew she was lying. I could see the deception in her brown eyes. When my mother was on one of her euphoric highs, there was no holding her back, or even suppressing her exuberant energy. We would come home to find she had purchased the entire supermarket, and I'm not kidding either. There would be an excess of food in the kitchen, half-eaten tubs of strawberry ice cream that had melted lying on the kitchen counter. Large boxes of doughnuts with bites in them would be scattered over the surfaces. Cans of half-drunk soda pop would be lying on every available area of the house, the sugar rush only heightening her excitability. She would go on these excessive shopping binges where she would buy an excess of flamboyant, colourful designer clothes she would invariably never ever end up wearing. You would find exquisite designer purses lying strewn over the sofa, along with all these fancy cardboard bags of items she had purchased impulsively on a whim at fancy boutiques. My mother would be corybantic about all her purchases. "Look at these amazing shoes I bought! Aren't they absolutely divine?" she would pipe ecstatically, modelling them for us on the carpet, with heels so high she could barely stand, without tripping precariously all over the place. "Oh, don't I look incredible?" she would say. Me and my brother would both give each other knowing, exasperated glances. Sometimes she'd take us shopping together, going ballistic, buying everything in sight for us, in a frenetic enthusiasm. Even when we insisted we didn't want the thing, she would still insist on buying it for us. Don't get me wrong, we enjoyed being spoilt, but my mother's intoxicated exuberance would make some people think she was either drunk or completely stoned. It could become incredibly embarrassing for us. Invariably we would observe the shop assistants rolling their eyes, looking at each other and whispering, "What the heck is her problem? She's like a woman on speed." Sometimes we would come home to find my mother on a stepladder, wearing denim dungarees, covered in paint, with a paint roller in her hands, as on a whim she decided to paint the entire living room bright purple. Naturally, we always knew the colour would only last a couple of days, until on another high she would change the colour to a bright, dazzling daffodil yellow. "I don't know what possessed me to paint the room that purple colour," she would say. "It's positively hideous, but isn't this yellow so much better? It's the colour of sunshine. It's absolutely stunning." Other times she would be in a cleaning frenzy, claiming that she was spring cleaning the house. She would scrub so incredibly hard, her skin on her fingers became blistered and raw. Our house would smell of bleach, furniture polish, and the fake bouquet of lavender deodorizer. "Oh, doesn't the house look so incredible? I doubt even the White House is this meticulous. There isn't a grain of dust anywhere, not a single speck. You could literally eat your dinner off the floor. It's that perfect. It's completely spotless. Isn't it wonderful? Then there was the nymphomania, which always happened to my mother. It can be an unfortunate side effect of bipolar disorder. When she was on a high, her inflamed passions became insatiable, almost like an obsession or a desperate itch she had to scratch, rather like a drug addict determined to have their next fix. They'll pretty much do anything to get it, even stooping as low as stealing from their own family members. We weren't sure if my father was aware of my mother's indiscretions, but believe me, there were many of them. It was like she had no inhibitions or natural boundaries. She didn't discriminate. One day she would be fraternizing with the pool man. Next week it would be the man that was trimming the neighbour's hedge next door. On a whim, they would be brought into our lives like leaves blown through the window by a feisty wind. I remember one time when it was raining cats and dogs outside, the old vagrant was walking down our street with his shopping trolley containing all his worldly possessions, rattling, wobbling and crashing loudly down the ribbon of asphalt. My mother, on hearing him, became rapturous. Her brown eyes danced excitedly. I groaned inwardly. I knew that look only too well. My mother dashed confidently outside onto the street, in her long leather boots, wearing a short black dress that left little to the imagination. Before we knew it, the old vagrant had been escorted and whisked into our home, welcomed by my mother like a celebrity. "Does he not look like George Clooney?" she said, chuckling with pleasure. "What's your name, love?" The vagrant would mumble, "My name is Nick Oliver." "Oh, like Jamie Oliver the cook. Now I ask you kids, isn't he so handsome? Look at his wonderful beard. It's making me perfectly hot under the collar." In truth, I don't think this poor vagrant knew what was happening to him. His dirty face looked bewildered, surprised even. He gave us a gormless, toothless grin. He was wearing limp rags. His fizzy grey beard, along with his matted, tangled hair, which was swept away from his face in a bedraggled ponytail, looked worse for wear, as if it hadn't seen a hairbrush in decades. I remember he brought into the house a stench that seemed to permeate our furnishings for weeks afterwards. It was nasty, and when I say nasty, I mean nasty. It was the smell of stale urine, gin, body odour that hung around our home for days on end. It was such a profusive bad smell, but it was like my mother was blindly oblivious to it. She had no inhibitions whatsoever. She conveniently saw what she wanted to see. She led the befuddled man into her bedroom for some hanky-panky indulgent fun, of which she was clearly the instigator. He looked like his Christmases had all come at once. "I think I'm going to throw up," I said to Malcolm. "This is extreme behaviour. George Clooney, my foot. I've seen everything now." "She's definitely not taking her meds," he said. "Not if she's bringing a man into the house that smells like a sewer. She's completely off her trolley, barking mad." To be fair to my mother, she did allow the man to have a hot bath, to change his clothes. He did end up leaving our premises looking halfway decent, but he always hung around our home in the fleeting hope that my mother would pursue him again, like a lion on the prowl. My mother had absolutely no boundaries. There were not many men safe around our home when she was on one of her highs. When my father was around, he would tell us to be patient with our mother, to understand this bipolar condition of hers, to be sensitive to her plight and her feelings. It certainly infuriated us, as he was never around for the worst of it, which was always very convenient. He had absolutely no comprehension of how exceedingly difficult it was to live with my mother at times, 24/7. "You're never here, Dad. Not when it rarely counts," I scolded. "When it gets very bad around here. It's so convenient when Mum is having one of her depressive episodes. You and the cat, Moonshine, are nowhere to be seen. Disappeared off the face of the earth. One time she swallowed a whole bunch of pills. We had to call the ambulance. But where were you when she was having her stomach pumped?" "Now, that's not fair," said my father, flushing. "I did get to the hospital after your call. Don't you remember? Look, I admit, sometimes I do need a break from your mother. Her highs and her lows, they rarely get to me. They wear me down. But don't be unreasonable, sweetheart. She's a very difficult woman." It's because she's not taking her medication, I insisted. If she did, things would be so different in this household. We might actually have somewhat of a normal life. You should get her help. Try and persuade her, for goodness sake, to take those tablets. Then we wouldn't have to live in this dreadful chaos. Me and Malcolm had reached a point that we couldn't live with my mother any more. We were at the end of our tether. You'd have to live with her to really understand. We heard about an abandoned house outside Seattle in the woods from a kid at school called Lynn, who took the school bus with us regularly. She happened to mention in passing when someone was showing a picture of a ghost caught on a camera gliding down a staircase. I tell you where you'd be guaranteed to see a ghost, said Lynn. You know that haunted abandoned house on the hill near the woods? I won't go anywhere near that place. It's so spooky. It's all in rack and ruin now. Windows broken, creepers climbing up the walls. It's far from pretty, very sinister looking. Looks like the kind of place Universal Studios would use to release their next scary movie. They wouldn't even have to make the props. They're all there. What happened to the owner, I asked. That's the funny thing, said Lynn. My mother said the woman disappeared off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. And not too long ago either. I think she's been gone for 2 years now. My mother tells me hundreds of people go missing every year all over America for all kinds of mysterious reasons. Some people believe it's to do with portals, believing that there's extra dimensions out there that can take you into other worlds. Then they think there might be extraterrestrials that abduct people, stuff like that. So no one knows what happened to the poor woman. She was there one day, gone the next. Me and my brother, upon hearing about this place, had planned our escape from home. We weren't concerned about ghosts at all. That was the least of our worries. We packed a huge backpack with food, camping supplies, which included torches, a kerosene lantern, sleeping bags and a gas cooker. But my mother, in her suspended, altered reality, would sometimes claim to see hallucinogenic spiders climbing up walls that weren't there. She would clearly be indifferent about whether we were around or not. In truth, we sneakily suspected she was unlikely to notice our absence from home at all. Nothing prepared me and Malcolm for what we were about to see. We had traipsed up the steep hilly incline, followed the old overgrown asphalt road, now completely covered in grass, that went through the woods. We were quick to become out of breath. Finally we reached the top of the hill, which was a vast flattened expanse filled with towering mature ponderosa pines that towered up into the sky like vast magnificent emerald skyscrapers framing the long road on either side. We discerned the ground beneath the trees was a dark colour, richly fertilized from years and years of the accumulated needles that had enriched the soil with a soft, lush mulch. There were mosses, ferns, pretty ground covers, boulders, and occasional patches of grass. The forest smelt of pine mingled with butterscotch or caramel. The asphalt road veered through the woods in a straight line, but on a swift right-hand turn was an old asphalt driveway, completely overgrown, with grass much like the old derelict road that was no longer in use. There were tree branches lying strewn haphazardly across the path. Our feet crunched leaves, pine needles and grass as we walked towards what I can only describe as an abandoned, forsaken house. It looked bedraggled, sad even, like it had seen better days. It was a sorrowful sight. The old brick symmetrical home was still standing. Its roof did seem to be a little bit dilapidated, windows broken, unruly creepers winding their way up the walls and through the windows like ugly tentacles. The white wooden front door was wide open. The white wooden frames of the windows were beginning to warp. The paint was crackling and flaking off. The structure of the house, its foundations and walls, still remained intact. It would not be a liability for us to sleep under this roof. That was a huge relief. We entered the house. The door creaked open. I was relieved to see that the dry wall and the insulation was also intact, but the place was still fully furnished in what at one time had been quality furnishings that had been robbed of their former elegant lustre. Now they were frayed, bedraggled, the flower print faded. Their upholstered cushioning had been flattened significantly, almost as if some of the stuffing had been eaten by mice. The long, once luxurious cream curtains, made from a quality fabric, still dangled around the windows, sweeping elegantly onto the floor, their edges framed by congealed dust. There was wooden antique furniture coated in thick layers of dust, begging to be polished. Framed pictures still hanging on the walls. The curvaceous wooden staircase, although dusty, was draped in dramatic silken cobwebs. It was solid and robust. The bedrooms were surprisingly neat, just cloaked in dust, with wardrobes filled with women's clothes, hanging precariously on hangers from anoraks to jackets and dresses. The beds were all made up with outer covers, and were swathed in thick layers of dust. The main bedroom had a funky smell and appeared to look as if an elephant had been lying on the middle of the mattress, as there was a massive dent in its centre, as if the mattress had given way under a sizable weight, as if something monstrously huge had been sleeping there. It was covered with pieces of grass. We decided to avoid that room like the plague, keeping the door firmly shut to keep out the unpleasant smell. While the dated kitchen looked like it had experienced a makeover in the early 80s, consisted of a backsplash of cracked tiles in a very drab cream colour, with the occasional picture of a violet interspersed between them to reduce the monotony. It was neat, but now dappled with leaves, plant debris, dried twigs and pine needles that had been brought in by the blustering winds from a left-open kitchen window. The yellow linoleum floors were now covered in broken glass and china crockery, all clearly victims from this cantankerous, windy assault. Me and my brother began to clean up the place vigorously, to make it halfway livable, decent. We found a broom, dustbin and brush, feather duster, rags and old cleaning materials that were still usable, and for hours we cleaned up the place, bagging up any stuff we found scattered across the floor, piling all the rubbish in bin liners, which were left in a neat pile in the very overgrown backyard. I think we filled over 100 bags with rubbish. Luckily for us, there was a little stream trickling through the woods with a sprightly current that cascaded over smooth rocks, filled with the clear water suitable for drinking and cleaning. After an extensive cleaning session, the house began to sparkle, twinkle and gleam. It was a pity there was no electric power supply, but we had the floors as clean as a whistle. All the raccoon droppings and dead insects were now gone, the surfaces shining from polish, while the cobwebs had been dusted away. It was a dramatic, radical transformation that was oddly satisfying to accomplish for us. Me and my brother lived in this abandoned house for over a month, sleeping at night in one of the bedrooms in our sleeping bags on the queen-size bed in there. We walked into the small town during the day to stock up on goodies, relieved to see that no one appeared to be looking for us, as there were no missing posters around. Sometimes that concerned us as a distinct possibility if my parents realised we were missing, especially if the school informed them that we hadn't turned up for our lessons, but ours was not a normal family. So surprised we most certainly were not. Maybe there was a wee bit of disappointment on our parts to know that we hadn't even been missed. We would visit the local launderette to wash our clothes there. We both had a sizable amount of cash in our savings accounts, left to us by my father's brother, after he'd passed away from cancer 3 years prior. It was a life-saving fund for us. For the first time in our lives we began to feel the peace we'd always craved, something that had eluded us for most of our lives. We had never known what it was like to have a normal life, with a sense of stability and balance. It was like a craving that had now been satisfied. The longer we were away from my mother, the happier we began to feel. As for my father, his absence was so commonplace in our lives, we didn't give him a fleeting thought. Well, not really. We did, however, miss school and all our friends, but that could not be helped under the circumstances. I do wonder what happened to the poor lady that lived here. I'm curious as to why she abandoned her home. Why do you think she vanished? I asked my brother. My brother was reflective. Some people just want to vanish, he said. Sometimes the challenges of life or their personal relationships get too much. They decide to abandon their lives, much like we have done. I showed my brother a photograph of the woman who'd owned our house. She was standing in the front yard, which was very neat in the photograph in those days, not overgrown like it was now. She appeared to have her arms around a young girl. They were smiling in the camera. They looked incredibly happy. You know what, Malcolm? There's no sign of a girl living in this house. Do you think something might have happened to her? Possibly. Unless, of course, the lady who lived here was divorced. The father may have had custody over the child. You don't know. Maybe being away from her child drove her to the brink of despair. People's lives are complicated. Look at us. On the surface, everything is hunky-dory. But look how messed up our lives are, and have been with my mother and her erratic behaviour. You mark my words, we're not the only ones out there, with lives wrought with family difficulties. There are others like us, facing similar struggles, far worse than ourselves. One night, as me and Malcolm retired to our sleeping bags, with only the light of our oil-burning lantern to soften the extreme darkness, which we kept burning all night so that we could physically see, we were awoken to a loud banging, crashing sound. Something was thrashing around in the backyard, making a thunderous commotion. Whatever it was, it appeared to be hefty, weighty, substantial in size, very intimidating. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I was freaking out so much. I could feel spasms of terror darting down my spine like electric shocks. My insides had virtually turned to mush. I was that scared. "Hear that?" I whispered to my brother in alarm. "Malcolm, I'm scared, really scared. I promise you, there's something out there. Whatever it is, it's big. It's very big." "Calm down, sis. It's possibly only a bear. They tend to make a loud commotion. But you mark my words, he'll be gone. We have some leftovers in one of our bags out there. Bears have a phenomenal sense of smell. He's probably digging in the bin liners, tucking into that dry pecan pie we threw out. Even as I speak, they can be very noisy." "You sure he won't come in here?" I asked. "I mean, the doors are not locked. What if he pushes it open with one of his paws, comes thundering into this house? What then? He might attack us, kill us even." "Of course he's not going to come in," said my brother, trying to reassure me. "It's very unlikely. I don't think bears like confined spaces. I could be wrong, but I think they don't." I cautiously crept out of my sleeping bag, surreptitiously tiptoeing towards the window, to see if I could see the shadowy silhouette of a bear loitering around the place. I was greeted to the welcoming sight of a gleaming full moon, blazing through the dusky sky, lighting up the night like an illustrious rounded lantern, assisted in its endeavours by the tranquil light of the silvery stars. They wilfully dotted the firmament in clusters of bedazzling, glittering diamonds. Yet despite the reassuring light offered to us by the generous constellations, this night held a menacing ambience in the palm of its hands, something I'd never quite discerned before while staying here at the abandoned house. I cannot put a precise finger on what it actually was, but it was like every tree, every blade of grass, every dandelion, every wildflower, every pebble, every droplet of water in the stream, was brazenly aware of the hostile energy that cloaked everything with an inconspicuous, thick, muggy, ill-omened oppression that, although invisible to the naked eye, could be clearly felt, discerned, and physically experienced in a tangible way, like ghostly ethereal hands nudging you, with a clear distinctive warning, engaging you with an instinctive appalling revelation, that within the deplorable darkness of this night, a deep grievous evil was now materializing. It was drawing ever closer, sending the most horrifying chills over my body, like a blustering cold Siberian wind. Another thing that also held my attention, like a gripping scene in a horrifying, gruesome movie, was the extreme disquieting silence. Everything was very, very still. The sounds of the stream that cascaded through the forest had dissipated, along with the chirping crickets or croaking frogs that serenaded every night for us with their joyful chorus. They had completely vanished. There were no distant sounds of owls hooting, nor were there cries of coyotes, which would have been somewhat heartening for us. All I could hear was the portentous whistling of the wind, whooshing, swishing, whizzing and whiffing through the trees as it picked up speed. But this sound was malign, airy, eldritch, like a disembodied, ethereal, ghostly wail, like lost souls moaning in the woods. Worse still, the baleful shapes of the ponderosa pines looked like tall spectral giants. Their boughs of needles jiggled in the wind, very menacingly. Beyond that we were met with silence, until the crashing and banging sound began all over again. "What the heck?" said my brother. "That bear is making one hell of a commotion, just over some leftover pecan nut pie. I do know they have a sweet tooth, but this is ridiculous." With the wind picking up speed, the window in the bedroom began to bang against the wall, while gusts of cold air enveloped the room in the most repugnant bouquet of decomposition, death, and decay. It had the faint reminiscence of the smell in the main bedroom, where a substantial form had been lying on that bed. I wondered in secret horror if the bear outside had been camping in that room. The thought left me feeling very aggrieved. "Bloody hell," said my brother. "Belinda, for goodness sake, close the bloody window. It's freezing cold in here. What is that god-awful smell? It's absolutely rank." All of a sudden, we heard the front door swing open. The gusts of air blasted through the house, causing the front door to bang repetitively against the outside wall. Then we heard a thumping sound, as if something disembodied or hefty was thundering up the sweeping staircase. This thing sounded huge, gargantuan, colossal. The staircase heaved, groaning under the hefty, sizable weight. The footsteps moved towards the bedroom. I was sitting up in my sleeping bag, locked in the most horrendous fear that consumed me in a cocoon of complete, total, and utter dread. How I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I sensed something quite dreadful was about to enter our room. My brother had lost his ability to speak. His mouth hung open, his wide eyes filled with terror. They were glued to the door, as if he too anticipated a dreadful entry that was about to burst through this bedroom. Something, someone. He could sense it as much as I could. My heart was pounding so fast, I could feel the thumping vibration in my chest. My hands were clammy, my throat dry and scratchy. Then we saw him, a mass of silver-grey hair, entering our bedroom. I have no words to describe its monstrous proportions, its hectic appearance. He was quite literally built like the Incredible Hulk. He was about the height and width of a double mattress, only significantly taller. I would say without a shadow of a doubt it was easily over 10 foot tall, and easily over 1,000 pounds. I do not believe I have ever seen anything so large. His head was so low slung on his massive shoulders, like a rising arch. This creature had no neck to speak of. Its face was somewhat human, but it was so thick, dense, burly, muscular, with arms so long they trailed low down the sides of his legs, almost touching the ankles. His whole body was covered in thick, ropey hair, with the exception of his face that was as black as coal, the texture of leather. His deep-set dark eyes glared with a hostile red eyeshine. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw us. I felt as if I was staring into the eyes of a demon. Even the smell that he brought into the room was sulphurous, noxious. It was causing my eyes to water, my body to react with spasms of nausea. The creature glared at us with such a defiant look. It felt as if he was looking through the depths of our souls. He seemed to be able to discern our very thoughts. He opened his mouth, pulling back his thin lips, and began to growl. The sound permeated my body, terrorized my senses. I felt like a deer trapped in headlights, frozen by terror, unable to move. I could sense a voice streaming into my mind. "Get out, or I will kill you!" My brother had heard exactly the same voice. In a trice, our senses were seized with a desire to survive the heinous encounter. We quickly darted down the staircase, out of the house, into the rampant yard, down the overgrown asphalt drive, to the asphalt road, down the hill to the road leading to town, where we hitched a lift from a kindly stranger. We walked the rest of the journey back home, not caring about any of the possessions we'd left behind, nor would we ever return again to retrieve them. When we returned home, we realized that our mother had failed to even establish that we had been missing for over a month, even with the constant telephone calls from our school that tirelessly plagued her with questions as to our whereabouts. It turned out she thought we'd gone to stay with our grandmother on her side, who we only visited once a year. My grandmother refused to see my mother. They had fallen out a long time ago. I think my mother must have hallucinated our visiting her. My father thought the very same. We never told them the truth, but the great news is a year later my father divorced my mother. We chose to live with him, so we did find peace at last. We now know the creature that terrified the life out of us was in fact a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or Yeti. Could that be the reason the missing woman vanished from that old abandoned house? One can only begin to wonder. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, whirlwind entered our lives quite by surprise, hence the name that is very apt under these circumstances. One day, quite by chance, we found a strange black and bay horse grazing in one of our meadows with our other horses quite happily, as if she'd always belonged there. Me and my mother stood there gobsmacked, our mouths hanging open in astonishment, our eyes wide with shock. Where in the world had this mysterious horse appeared from? She was fine, a resplendent horse, even more striking and alluring than the other horses in our field. They weren't adverse to her presence, but had welcomed her. We had no idea where she came from, but for us she was like a gift from heaven. From day one she had the most extraordinary temperament, unlike any other horse I've ever come across in my life. She was a remarkable horse. We would soon discover how special she really was. A mover and shaker among horses that could quite literally change, transform people's lives like magic, as whoever she touched was forever transmuted by her presence. She had a way of reassuring human beings, reaching out to them with a genuine love, as though she empathized with their plight. While she loved to gallop around the fields, much like the other horses, there was something that stood out about her, like a jewel in the crown, or like a bright rose among the thorns. "Where did she come from, Mum?" I'd asked. "Who would dump a quality American quarterback horse like this in our meadow? It seems nonsensical, ludicrous even, especially a horse like this that stands out in a crowd." "Well, my guess is the owner couldn't afford her upkeep, so she dumped the horse on us. Stranger things have happened, sweetheart. I'd say don't look a gift horse in the mouth under the circumstances. That would be a profound statement to make in her regard, for she is a fine horse indeed. But they could have sold her, couldn't they? Made some really good money out of her. She's worth a pretty penny, surely." "Maybe so, but maybe the owner thought the horse deserved a good quality life, thought dropping her off with us would ensure she received the best care. We have a reputation here in Philly for giving our horses excellent lives. People aren't always motivated by money, sweetheart. Sometimes love, personal sacrifice comes into the equation, is so much more important to a person. Perhaps the owner put her heart above money. I take my hat off to her or to him for doing the right thing by putting the horse's quintessential needs above their own. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see she's one hell of a special horse. Mum, please can she be mine? I'll take such good care of her, I promise. I'll muck out her stables every day, exercise, feed her. I'll do everything it takes to make her feel loved." "You know what? That's a fabulous idea. Your two older sisters had their own horses when they were your age. You should certainly have your own. I was intending on giving you Ladybug, but now that Whirlwind has miraculously entered our lives and arrived on the scene, I don't see why she can't be yours. But I am relying on you to exercise her, muck out the stables, look after her. That way she'll know she's yours." "Oh, thank you, Mum," I said, covering her with hundreds of kisses all over the face. "This means the entire world to me. Did you hear that, Whirlwind?" I said, stroking my hands lovingly in her mane and plaiting it in between my fingers. "My mother says you're my horse. You're mine, Whirlwind." Whirlwind nuzzled me with her nostrils. The breath puffed out of her nose. She looked as if she understood every single word. Her ears were bent forwards, alert. She appeared seemingly engaged in our conversation, as her deep brown eyes darted from my mother then to me, watching our mannerisms curiously, reading our energy with an ardent efficiency, rubbing her dish-shaped head up and down against my arm affectionately. "I think she understands what you're saying. She knows she's your horse." At that time when Whirlwind came into my life, I was about 18 years old, the last remaining daughter on my parents' farm. My other two sisters had long since left home. Both were practicing doctors, married with young children all of their own. Amanda was living in Scranton, and Bernice in Hazleton, but they would regularly come home to visit us, as we were a very close family. We would invariably get together on the weekends with their children and husbands to have spectacular barbecues on the patio, enjoying a cosy family rendezvous, extended lunches that meandered into the late evenings. Sometimes in the afternoons, me and my sisters would go horseback riding in the countryside together. Despite the age difference, I was very close to them, most especially my older sister Amanda, who always had my back and looked out for me. I was living on a spectacularly beautiful horseboarding farm in northeast Pennsylvania with both my parents, including areas like the Pocono Mountains, the Endless Mountains, along with the industrial cities of Scranton, Wilkes, Barre, Pittston, Hazleton, Nanticoke and Carbondale, in reasonably close proximity. My mother offered horse riding lessons on our farm, which obviously possessed riding arenas, horse barns, stalls, outbuildings, silvery ponds, and the list goes on. Ours was a typical asymmetrical double-storey American farmhouse with a front gable, central chimney, wrap-around porch, overlooking exquisite views of endless undulating green turf, large clusters of red maples, flowering dogwoods, white ash and eastern white pine trees. It was not long after Whirlwind had graced our lives with her phenomenal, benevolent, calming presence that I soon began to realise what an exceptional, outstanding horse she really was, over and above what we had originally perceived. I've always known how remarkably special horses are, as I've grown around them all my life, and they really are incredible animals. Whirlwind had a huge affinity to human beings, especially humans that were ill or in need of encouragement. One day, one of my mother's more mature riding students, who was in her early 70s, began to dismount her horse Bright Eyes, when Whirlwind boldly came trotting over to her. She began nuzzling her left breast, looking at her with deep emotional eyes. It was like she was telling the student that something was seriously wrong with that breast. She seemed concerned, compassionate, empathetic. We all stared at Whirlwind agog, knowing that this horse was conveying something significant that needed her immediate attention. "Bloody hell," said Nicola. "Your horse keeps nuzzling my left breast. I better have it checked out with the doctor. She seems troubled about me." "Excellent idea, Nicola," piped my mother. "Horses are remarkably intuitive. It's not that she's smelling something weird on you. She's sensing a disfigurement in your energy field, or alignment if you like, warranting investigation. I do believe Whirlwind is trying to tell you something very significant." A week later, Nicola phoned us to tell us she had an aggressive form of breast cancer. Her doctor informed her that if she had not caught it in time, she could have been dead within a year. It was extraordinary. Whirlwind had saved her life. Then there was another lady, Caroline, who was in her early 30s, that was taking a riding lesson with my mother at the time. I was riding Whirlwind on that occasion, and had dismounted her. I was about to lead her away to the meadow to graze with the other horses, when Whirlwind promptly trotted over to Carol Ann and began to nuzzle her, looking at her through soulful eyes. It was clear she was offering her comfort of some kind, but why we could not imagine. It seemed that Carol Ann lapped up the kindness like a thirsty dog. "My goodness, your horse knows. How can she possibly know?" Carol Ann began to blubber, like a baby, as the floodbanks of her eyes burst open, while tears cascaded down her face, leaving telltale white trails through her foundation, while Whirlwind stood there, offering her moral support with affectionate nuzzles. "What does Whirlwind know?" asked my mother. "My father passed away yesterday. I've barely been able to cope, and I'm falling apart at the seams. I'm so devastated, but this horse has sensed my pain. It's absolutely incredible." I soon began to notice in my own life how Whirlwind always perceptively, intuitively deduced when I was going through emotional trauma of some kind, much like when my boyfriend ended our relationship, proclaiming that he had fallen for someone else. It was a nagging, unpleasant recall for me that brings great discomfort, for nobody enjoys rifling through those kind of memories, memories of being dumped. It's never a pretty picture, whatever way you look at it. "Sorry, Tessa," he had said to me. "There's no delicate way to say this to you, but I've met someone else. There's no point in pretending otherwise. You wouldn't want me to lie to you, would you?" "Actually, I think I would." Ouch, that really stings. Don't be ridiculous, Tess. You know you appreciate the truth. You always have. You always will. You've always believed in being straight about things. Direct, honest. Not when it hits you in the face like a forklift truck, I don't. So who is she then, this girl, that you appear to have fallen for, that is clearly much better than I am? I watched my boyfriend's face light up like a Christmas tree, as if thinking about this girl made him go weak at the knees. It made me shudder in disgust, seriously wanting to throw up. I felt nauseously sick. I think you should go, I said, choking with tears that I tried desperately to suppress. Now, I ordered. But Tess, be reasonable. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Go. My heart had broken into thousands of pieces. I was distraught, so distraught that for a while I never told anyone what had happened. I felt belittled, humiliated, fragile, vulnerable, ashamed even. I'm not actually sure why. Rejection is not a good feeling, any way you look at it. Like a roadside bandit, it stealthily sneaks upon you by surprise, catching you unaware and off your guard when you least expect it, demanding to seize your self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth from you, at gunpoint, like precious sparkling jewels that he wants to stash or squirrel away in his robber's bag that you can never have back again. Well, that's how it seemed for me. If my boyfriend thought I wasn't good enough, then maybe it was true, I thought. He had dropped me like a second-hand pair of sneakers he was no longer desirous to wear, had worn out, in favour for a bright new pair that on the surface appeared so much more beguiling. But I knew in my gut that before long he'd cast out this new girlfriend of his, almost as callously, cold-heartedly, and ruthlessly as he had done me, when their relationship invariably lost its sparkle. The seemingly perfect package had worn away to reveal its hideous imperfections. When Whirlwind perceived my broken, fractured spirit, she was the one that comforted me in my distress. She trotted over to me, nuzzled me affectionately with her dish-shaped head, looking deep into my eyes with hers that were like deep pools of unconditional love. I felt as if she really got me. It was like she was saying, "You are good enough, Tess. You're too good for him." That was how successfully she lifted me out of my despondency, made me realise that yes, I was good enough. If my boyfriend could not see my value, it was his loss, my gain. It meant that I was too good for him, not the other way round. After my horse's encouragement, I gained a new lease of life, never once regretting or looking back on the old, but embracing the new with an eager zealousness and positive outlook. Soon word about Whirlwind's natural infinity with humans spread, and people were talking about my miracle horse. One day we received a phone call from an old lady who was in a dreadful state. "My husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer," she told us, sobbing on the phone. "He hasn't taken it well. It's like he's already died, given up. There's no fight left in him. He's emotionally declining. He refuses to eat. He really has withdrawn from life. His depression is quite considerable. I'm desperately concerned. I so want him to make the most of the time he has left, the time we have left together, that we can enjoy before he leaves this earth. I want it to mean something. But with him like this, in this grievous state of mind, how can we create any meaningful memories together?" "I'm very sorry to hear about that," said my mother. "Perhaps he needs to see a therapist." "That's what I was thinking," said the woman. "A very good therapist at that." "I'm sorry," said my mother, "but I board horses. I give riding lessons to pupils. I'm not in a professional capacity or position to help you. You need to phone up a hospice. I'm quite sure they'll put you in touch with the right people. They can really assist you. I'm sure they can." "But you have the perfect therapist. How about that horse of yours? I've been hearing all about Whirlwind. Could she not help my husband?" "But how?" protested my mother. "She's a horse, not a therapist." The woman was not taking no for an answer. She was quite insistent with my mother. "Bring the horse to my neck of the woods. Lead her into my husband's bedroom. There's space in my home for a horse to walk through it. I'll pay all your transportation costs and your trouble." "Very well," said my mother, "if you really believe it'll help you." "Oh, I do," said the woman. "I really do." I was exceedingly excited taking Whirlwind to this woman's home to see the dying man. I was curious as to how she would react to him. Nothing was to prepare me for how poignant and magical this moment would be. "Thank you so much for coming," said the woman, tears hanging like twinkling dewdrops on the edges of her dark eyelashes that thickly framed her eyelids, emphasizing her pretty brown eyes that held a glimmer of excitement in their depths. I could tell she firmly believed that Whirlwind was the quintessential catalyst to bring her husband out of his self-induced depression. "My name is Alice Berger," she said, tossing her mane of bouncy brown curls to one side. "Oh, she is a beauty," she said, looking at Whirlwind with such appreciation. "What a magnificent horse!" Whirlwind stood there so calm and relaxed, as if she knew exactly what she needed to do. I led her carefully into Alice Berger's house, swathed in her blue horse blanket. When we reached one of the closed doors, it was Whirlwind herself that initiated proceedings, by eagerly pushing the door open using her nozzle. It was like she knew what needed to be done. She intended to do it. She sensed a dying man was in desperate need of comforting. She was eager to oblige, more than eager. She wanted to reach out to this hopeless man in a poignant way. The emaciated figure of a man lay on his bed, a picture of doom, hopelessness, despair, in his solitary confinement. He was swaddled in a cotton sheet that clung to his shape like cling film, emphasizing how wilted, frail, wasted his body had become. I could see the sharp shapes of his chest bones sticking through the skin like knotly, gnarled roots. He looked as fragile as a doll, his skin whiter than a sheet, mottled by liver spots. It clung to his skull tightly, like fine tissue paper. His sunken eyes were closed. His hollow cheeks left deep depressions on the side of his face. Whirlwind boldly trotted over to him. She stood so gracefully over the man's bed, her gentle nose sniffing the old man's face. The vibration of the horse's deep breaths, the ticklish hairs on his nose, most certainly aroused the man from his sleep. His eyes opened slowly like the blinds from a window. At first he seemed bewildered to have a horse in his bedroom. I mean, who wouldn't be? It would come as a surprise to anybody. Whirlwind nuzzled him kindly, surveying him through sympathetic dark brown eyes, as if empathizing with his pain, saying, "I do understand your grief." The man's face changed as quickly as sunshine breaking through the overcast skies on a gloomy day. His bright brown eyes twinkled as he looked directly in the horse's eyes. The two of them had a magical, intimate moment together, so personal, private, exclusive, unique between the two of them, as though they were connecting on a deep soul level. The man smiled brightly. His hand reached up to stroke Whirlwind. The heaviness in the room was swallowed whole like a pill down the throat. Suddenly the room was bathed in a light ethereal energy. The man's bedroom was filled now with joyful laughter. "What's her name?" he asked me. "Whirlwind," I said. "Whirlwind. I like it," he said. "What a lovely name. She's entered this room just like a whirlwind, positively lifting my spirits." It was true. Whirlwind changed the last few months of Neville Berger's life. He positively enjoyed the time he had left in the world with his wife Alice. It was thanks to Whirlwind's positive influences that had transformed his outlook over his progressive illness. Whirlwind came to visit him once a week. Neville began to have a much more sunny outlook. He began to eat again, treasuring every single moment he had left. The fear of dying that had hung over his life like a veil of dread dissipated like the vapour from a steaming iron. So he lived his life with a fervent reverence and thankful acclamation until he breathed his last. He died in peace, a very happy man. One day in the late summer of 2006, I was riding with Whirlwind on our land, as we have a sizable property. All of a sudden Whirlwind began to smell something in the air that I could not perceive or discern myself personally. She looked disquieted. I'd seen that beleaguered look before. It was the sagacious, penetrating, erudite look that she had when she recognized the woman had breast cancer. I knew that Whirlwind had sensed something profound, ambiguous, significant. so I gave her my full attention. I knew when I needed to listen to my horse. I allowed her to lead the way. Something was seriously irking her. She was such an intuitive, sensitive horse. We trotted down the riding trail through the wood green that consisted of stunning red maple trees. Whirlwind stopped next to a very wide red maple tree, with an interesting curvaceous trunk scattered with pretty leaves. She began to whinny, move her front hoof backwards and forwards, as if pointing out something to me. Then she moved deliberately towards this massive hairy form lying on the grass in a big lump. She began to nudge the bundle of hair with her dish-shaped head. At first this hairy form appeared to me like a big mass of bedraggled fur coats that someone had flung haphazardly in the field and were caked in dirt and muck, obviously requiring plenty of cleaning. Was something lying under that large fur coat, I wondered? A vagrant, perhaps? The fur began to move. A pair of startled, deep-set eyes in a cone-shaped head looked up at Whirlwind for a moment and then darted towards me. I was astonished. I was staring at a creature with a remarkably human face. The big mound of hair was attached to this thing. Whirlwind neighed, nuzzling the great big lump of grey hair, glancing at me as if to say, "Do something." What was this strange creature, I wondered, dismounting my horse and walking directly towards it and crouching over it. The creature's head looked up at me, dropping to one side, almost as if lifting up its head was an arduous ordeal. Its eyes rolled back in its sockets, exposing its whites. It was breathing rapidly, with difficulty, as if it was laborious. I touched the rank, smelly hair that clung to his body, as though saturated with perspiration. It felt unnaturally cold to the touch. It should have been warm, but it wasn't. The creature was clearly ill. Something was seriously wrong with it. I knew it was in trouble. I sensed it was dying. Me and Whirlwind rode back to the house, while I proceeded to phone my sister Amanda, who's a doctor. "Amanda," I piped, "it's Tess." "Oh, Tess, how lovely to hear from you. How are you? This is a lovely surprise." "Sis, I'm fine. I need your help urgently. If you don't get here at once, it's going to die." "It? What's it, sis? You do know I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not going to be good at treating a wild animal, Tess. Mum uses a great vet for the horses. Why don't you ask her for help?" "Sis, this is serious. The creature's big. It's covered in hair. It looks human. Well, it's got a human face and body shape, that is." "Oh, my God! Are you being serious? Is this creature like a human but covered in hair? Is that what you're saying, sis?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. It's big, muscular, hairy, with a human face, overlong arms." "I think it's called a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, sis," she said. "Hang on, I'm coming now. We better keep this under wraps, Tess. No one can find out about this. This is very important. We have to be discreet. Understand? Don't even tell Mum and Dad. Promise me." "I promise," I said. "While you wait for me, I suggest you pitch up a tent in the woods. Put some bedding in there for the creature. I'll see you in a mo." When my sister arrived, she was with her husband Ned. They both eagerly followed me into the wood green, armed with medical supplies. I pointed to the hairy creature lying on the ground in a heap. "This is definitely a Sasquatch," she said excitedly. "I've read about these creatures before, but I never knew they were real. You're right. He's so very human." The creature groaned in agony, clutching his stomach in pain, looking at us through deep-set dark eyes that looked muddled and confused. He was too weak to lash out. It was clear he was disorientated, not comprehending what on earth was happening to him. He weighed an absolute ton, so we rolled him on a plastic ground sheet, dragging him into the tent, rolling him onto the bedding there. I had prepared piles and piles of duvet covers and blankets. I made it cosy for him, placing a bottle of water by his bed, along with a bowl of fruit and a bag of nuts, in case he became hungry. He sank into the warm, soft bedding with a grateful sigh. His body temperature was so low, I'm sure he was appreciative of the warmth. We covered him with a warm duvet. I poured some water down his throat. He drank it thirstily, as if he'd been too weak to drink for days. I could see his lips were cracking. They were terribly dry. "It would be far too traumatizing for the creature to go indoors, Unless we put him in an outside barn, my sister informed us. It's important for him to be close to nature. That's what he's comfortable with. The last thing we want to do is stress him out, as it could send him over the edge. Stress is a big deal for animals and humans. It's a huge killer. That's why when the cat gets the pigeon might just die from the shock, even if it's not injured. My sister began examining the creature. It's got a low body temperature. She pointed to a festering wound on its upper chest that I hadn't even noticed myself. Nasty, really nasty. It looks very infected. Poor thing. I need to clean it up and disinfect it. The creature needs immediate treatment. He has sepsis, blood poisoning, caused from the bacterial infection of the open wound. His body is beginning to shut down. If he doesn't receive intravenous fluids and antibiotics, he will surely die. Hopefully we can turn things around for him. He looks like he just might have a robust constitution. Before long, my sister was treating the creature with antibiotics and IV fluids that she had instinctively brought along for the creature. She informed me what needed to be done, showing me how to administer the medication and fluids over the next few days. I'm handing the reins over to you, Tess, relying on you. I know you're going to do a great job. You're very competent. We have to help this creature in secret. Otherwise it'll be a total nightmare for the poor little thing. Well, he's not very little, is he? But the last thing he needs is to be poked around, scrutinized by humans with their good intentions going awry. It'll only serve to stress out the poor thing. This Sasquatch needs his privacy and space like he has in nature, or he'll never make it, much like the pigeon with the cat. I want you to watch him, give him food when he's hungry and water. How long will he be like this, sis? I asked. I'm not sure. Some people with sepsis take weeks to recover. But I have a hunch this creature might heal a lot faster. Maybe a few days or so, if we're lucky. You cannot be sure. Everybody's completely different. So he's not going to die, then? I don't think so, Tess. But you never know. You have to accept that we did the best we could for the poor thing. That's all we can do. Keep me posted. Let me know how he's doing. I looked after the creature tirelessly for 2 long days. I'd been giving him a jug to pee in so he didn't need to leave his bed. I indicated for him how to use it. He understood, and he did. I left him a bedpan which was never used. His eyes watched me curiously as I helped him drink water and fed him baby food with a spoon in his mouth, which he swallowed gratefully. He watched me with bright brown, interested eyes that would follow me wherever I moved around the tent, always curious, always interested. I enjoyed looking after him. On the 3rd day he had gone, abandoned the tent, pulled out his IV fluid drip. I was absolutely devastated. There was no sign of him anywhere. I phoned my sister in a dreadful panic, unable to control my tears. What's happened, Tess? He's gone. He's gone. Look, sis, we did our best to help the poor creature. I'm sad if he's dead. It's terribly, terribly sad. But just remember this, we did our best. We perhaps just arrived on the scene too late to be able to help him. These things happen. I don't mean he's dead, sis. He's gone. He's not in the tent anymore. He's vanished. Oh, well, there you go. He must have recovered, Tess. What on earth are you aggrieved about? You should be happy, proud of yourself. You did a fabulous job in taking care of him like a professional nurse. Without your intervention, he would surely have died. He would not have left the tent if he was unwell, I can assure you of that. This is very heartening news indeed. I thought he would heal fast. He has that kind of robust-looking body, the type that heals very efficiently on its own. But I wanted to see him. Why did he not wait for me to give him the all clear? Tess, he's a wild man. He's not going to behave like you or me. He would likely see the world differently to us. At least you know he's probably going to be absolutely fine. You should be proud of yourself. You attended to all his needs. Out of interest, are the fruit and nuts you left him still there? No, they're all gone. There you are. That's another good sign. If he took them with him, he intends to eat them. If you're about to die, Tess, you're not going to eat a single thing. Well, you're unlikely to. So my guess is he's fully recovered. Remember, in the beginning, he didn't even have an appetite. Weeks passed by, then months, with no sign of the Bigfoot that I'd looked after. I'm not going to kid. I was disappointed. I so wanted to see him. I regarded him like a friend, even though I'd only known him disorientated, groggy, terribly sick. When he began to get better, he was so sweet, the way he watched me with those curious eyes. I loved the way he ate the baby food. I could tell he was desperately shy, but he was also immensely grateful. I knew he knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had been delivered from the brink of death's door. It was in the early spring of 2007 that something quite extraordinary happened. The cold winter was behind us. I was so appreciating the shafts of sunlight that were swathing my body in such a pleasurable warmth. It was a perfectly magnificent day. My mother was in the training arena, instructing a young girl called Tori in riding lessons, while her devoted mother Maria watched the session from outside the ring, encouraging her daughter's every move. I waved to them cordially. "Hello, Tess," called Maria. "How's Whirlwind doing?" she called. "She's fine," I told her. It was so funny how people always asked after my horse before they ever inquired about me. I would sometimes be stopped in town by people I vaguely knew, asking about Whirlwind, as she had developed a devoted following of human fans. I was taking my horse to visit a hospice when the head nurse in charge of the facility was never around. She would have done her nut if she'd seen me bringing Whirlwind into the hospice, and certainly had my guts for garters. One of the doctors suggested that Whirlwind might be a great source of animal therapy for dying patients. She had been appalled. "Dr. Lewis," she had snapped, "what a ludicrous idea! Are you completely off your head? Barking mad? Bringing a horse into this facility? Are you mad? Can you imagine if it starts pooping all over the floor, leaving its droppings everywhere? It'll be desperately unhygienic. I pride myself in keeping this facility in impeccable condition. But it would be so good for the patient's morale, bring them a sense of joy." "Don't be ridiculous, Dr. Lewis. I've heard everything now. It's quite out of the question." Unbeknownst to her, when she was off duty, we would quickly whisk Whirlwind into the hospice to see the patients, and she certainly boosted their morale. It was such a beautiful spring day. I could feel joy in my heart as I was marvelling at the cloudless blue sky. Everything was bursting with the radiance of spring. The flowering dogwoods were blooming. The air was filled with joyful birdsong. All of a sudden Whirlwind smelt something, stood still in her tracks, as though she had perceived something on the wind. All of a sudden, thundering through the brush towards us, was a Bigfoot I'd nursed to health. I was stunned. He looked absolutely magnificent. His formerly sickly hair seemed to sheen in the morning sun, as though shining from abundant good health. It was silky, smooth, almost as if it had been brushed. He stood up at about 8 foot tall, considerably bigger than I remembered him last. Maybe he had regained the weight he'd lost. His human face was easy to recognize. The creature glided towards Whirlwind. The critter nuzzled him affectionately. Then the Bigfoot looked directly into my eyes, and he said something into my mind. I promise you, as crazy as this sounds, I heard him say thank you. Thank you for saving my life. With that, he turned around, glided away. I was ecstatic. I had seen him again. He had acknowledged my help. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Molly and I'm originally from Atlanta, but when I got married to my husband Wayne, we both moved to rural Kentucky, where we converted the original plain white farmhouse into a beautiful idyllic shabby chic style lemon yellow cottage, which is surrounded by a white picket fence. Our beautiful garden is filled with large old oak trees and flower beds bursting at the seams with colourful blooms, complemented by a perfectly manicured lawn, which my husband Dwayne keeps in perfect condition all year round. Where I live, it's very rural and quite remote, with a beautiful lake downtown and plenty of untouched forest and countryside, which is perfect for would-be hikers and all those adventurous types that love to go exploring. Naturally, it goes without saying that there's a great deal of wildlife in our area. Sometimes you do get deer on our property, but more often than not they tend to stay in the untouched areas of natural habitat, which consists of large, lush green forests, silvery lakes, beautiful meadows, and glorious valleys. My Bigfoot encounter happened in the fall of 2009, which is my favourite part of the year because I simply adore those yellow carpets of glorious gold that literally caress the forest floor in regal splendor. I just think those shimmering gold autumn colors are utterly magnificent. My story starts when I had just had the most horrendous day at work. My boss was in an extremely foul mood, and he literally lostwitted with me over a report that I had filed, which he claimed was not up to my usual meticulous standards. I was flabbergasted, because I considered it to be one of my finest pieces of work to date, but he completely trashed it, so imagine how I felt. I was totally demoralized and completely downtrodden. Yet the day did get worse, believe it or not. My neighbor phoned me in a dreadful state about a large branch from a tree of mine that had fallen into his property due to a heavy windstorm. "What are you going to do about it?" he screamed. "This monstrosity is ruining my garden." "I will sort something out," I assured him. "I can hardly do anything about it now. I'm at work." As I drove my car through the rural back roads to my home, I was feeling completely defeated and deflated. It had been a terrible, terrible day, and I just could not wait to get home, to wind down and relax and finally put my feet up. You know that feeling. Suddenly I noticed a log strewn across the road, creating a barricade, and I literally held my steering wheel and screamed, "Oh!" It felt so good to release all that pent-up tension that had escalated throughout the day. Could the day get any worse, I wondered. I was about to find out. I slammed the door as I got out of my vehicle. It looked like someone had purposely blocked up the road, and I'm afraid my thoughts did wander to my neighbor. Had he done this to get his back on me, I wondered? It would be the sort of thing he would do. This neighbor of mine was an elderly man called Mr. Dixon, who everybody loved to hate. People in our area called him Mr. Grumps because he never wore a smile, and whenever he opened his mouth, it was invariably always to grumble and complain about something. Over the years, he had been known for his retaliatory behavior. On one occasion, when our chickens wandered into his yard, he literally threw his dog feces over our garden wall in an act of revenge. And one time, he even threw snails over my wall so that they would eat up all my plants. It was early evening, and it was growing dark outside as the sun started to set. I marveled at the spectacular yellow sunset mingled with the pretty shades of pink that blanketed the whole valley in glorious golden crimson tones. Luckily, the log was not so heavy, so I pushed it to the side of the road. What a nasty piece of work Mr. Dixon was, I thought angrily. It was hardly my fault that a branch from our tree had fallen into his yard. As I was about to get back into my car to drive away, I suddenly had this ominous feeling that I was being watched, and it was such a creepy feeling. I could actually feel the hairs on my arms standing on end, and I had visible goosebumps. I looked around at the valley with its ubiquitous trees and thick underlayers of long grasses and shrubbery, and I wondered if I had imagined it all. The early evening felt unusually quiet, and literally the stillness set my nerves on edge. Something was very wrong, I thought. There was no late afternoon, early evening bird song, which I was used to. It was weird, to say the least. I got back into my car and drove off with that airy feeling still haunting my belly. When I got home, my yellow Labradors were lying on the ground with bellies that were so swollen and inflated they looked like they were 9 months pregnant. They lay on their backs on my white and black kitchen floor, barely being able to move a muscle. "What on earth is wrong with Myrtle and Tiger?" I asked my husband in horror. "Should we not be taking them to the vet? Their stomachs are unnaturally distended and bloated." "I'm afraid they managed to break open the huge bag of dog food I bought," said my husband. "I came in here and found that they had gobbled up a month's supply of food between the two of them in one sitting." "You have got to be kidding," I said in horror. This really had been quite a day. The following morning, when I left for work once again, that horrible neighbor of mine had replaced the log in the center of the road, and so I got out once again to pull it to one side. Thank goodness it's Friday, I thought. I've had about as much as I can take. I have the weekend to look forward to now. Let's hope the day goes by fast and that my boss is in a better mood. As I was moving the log to the side of the road, I thought I detected a dark, shadowy form moving behind a tree. I was sure whatever this thing was, it was the same creature I had seen watching me the day before. I could feel those predatory eyes on me, and it made me feel uneasy. I looked around, and again I saw nothing. That evening the same thing happened all over again, and the log was once again lying across the road. Now I was mad with Mr. Dixon. I was going to give him a piece of my mind when I got home, I thought angrily. As I got out of the car, the breeze was blowing in a southerly direction, and I got a whiff of the most god-awful smell. It smelt like urine, sweat, feces and skunk, all blended together in a hideous gaseous cocktail. Once again I thought I saw the dark, shadowy form peering at me from behind a tree, and I could tell that whatever it was watching me, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable. I was very certain that whatever this thing was that was spying on me, this behavior was not common in any animal species that I knew. Creatures that tend to stalk their prey, like wild cats, coyotes, panthers and mountain lions, tend to be low on the ground, whereas this thing, whatever it was, appeared to be tall and large, and I did not think it was a bear, because bears don't behave like this. When I got home that evening, my dogs were still happily sleeping off and digesting a month's supply of food, and were in very good moods. I think they must have really enjoyed their pig out. I, on the other hand, was furious, and I phoned up Mr. Dixon and gave him a piece of my mind. "How dare you keep putting that log in the middle of the back road when I leave for work?" I shouted. "I know you were put out by the tree trunk falling into your garden, but my husband has sorted all that out for you, so why are you doing all this?" "I did not put any log in the back road," screamed Mr. Dixon. "And as for your husband, he did a crap job removing that tree branch. He scratched some paint off the side of the fence and messed it up." "Good," I said. "You deserve that, Mr. Dixon." "Shut up, you bitch," came Mr. Dixon's reply. "I knew you lot were trouble when you pulled down that perfectly good farmhouse and changed it into a god-awful designer cottage." "It's called shabby chic, Mr. Dixon," I corrected, "and it's a big improvement from the old house that was there before." "Not in my opinion," snapped Mr. Dixon, slamming down the phone. The next morning I overslept, but thankfully it was a Saturday and I could take it easy. I decided I'd have a lazy day and potter around the garden, and then later take the dogs for a walk in the late afternoon in the forest, near to where I'd seen that dark, shadowy form the day prior. I was hoping that I'd be able to figure out what that creature was with the protection of my 2 yellow labs in tow. I knew the dogs needed to work off the excess calories they consumed, because yellow labs are prone to obesity, and my dogs would literally eat themselves to death if they could. They just love food that much. We entered the forest, which smelt beautiful and was carpeted with golden showers of glorious leaves all over the ground, and so when you walk, you literally crunch the leaves under your feet. It was a beautiful breezy day with a slight chill because winter was on the horizon and the days were starting to get darker earlier. The dogs ran around the forest in delight, sniffing the ground in gusto, and then they sped off at immense speed into the depths of the forest, leaving me far behind, something that they would normally never do. I was naturally annoyed because my dogs are usually well behaved, which was why I would take them into the forest without their leashes on, because they are friendly animals that are not remotely aggressive, and they love everyone, including all breeds of dog, both large and small. I called after them, but they did not respond. "Tiger, Myrtle," I called, "come back at once! Tiger, Myrtle! Tiger, Myrtle! Tiger, Myrtle, come back! Tiger, Myrtle, Tiger!" As I ran into the forest, I noticed that horrible odour again that I had smelt the day before, and it was awful. I clenched my nostrils tightly and called out for my dogs again, but was met with total silence. "Tiger, Myrtle, where are you? Come on, Tiger, Myrtle!" I suddenly realised how spooky and creepy the forest felt, because it was so unnaturally quiet, but not in a peaceful way. In my gut I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't put the pieces together and figure it all out. All I can say is I sensed this ominous, foreboding presence. Maybe other animals felt it too, because there was no sign of a darting squirrel or a curious chipmunk, nor was there the cheerful bird song that I loved so very much. But suddenly I heard this gobbling sound, as if creatures were eating something in a hurry, and as I ventured deep into the woods, that was when I saw my yellow lads tearing at a hefty carcass. I grew very concerned. This was a freshly killed carcass, so the predator who it belonged to could be around and potentially could kill my dogs and myself, and we could both or all be in danger. Suddenly I heard this low guttural growl, and that noise was incapacitating. It went right through me, causing my whole body to shake uncontrollably. All I know is that I was filled with this overwhelming dread, and I knew that something quite terrible was about to transpire. The growling continued and got closer and closer and louder. Then we saw him, this monstrous creature, the likes of such I have never seen before, and in my eyes far more terrifying than an encounter with a large cat, such as even a tiger. This creature was gargantuan, and there are no other words to describe him. He was massive, powerful, and exceedingly strong. So strong, in fact, that it would have been nothing for him to have taken down the 700-pound deer in a heartbeat that my dogs were now devouring. This creature, whatever in God's name it was, must have been at the very least 8 foot tall and 900 pounds, and possibly even more. He looked like a giant-sized man, but he was not a man, or a giant ape, but he was not an ape. It was like there were two DNA profiles that had merged together to create this monstrous beast that some weird scientist had let loose into the forests of Kentucky. Well, those were my thoughts at the time, as I wondered what on earth this creature was, and how to react to it in a way that would not end up with either of my dogs and myself being fatally wounded. This creature was covered with thick, dark hair, and it looked like it was coated with mud all over, and it stank to high heaven of urine and feces. I noticed that the arms were long, and the head was shaped like half an egg that sat on a pair of massive shoulders without much of a neck, and the face was hairless, with a squashed nose, protruding forehead, thin mouth, and brown, hostile, angry eyes that were filled with incandescent rage. This volatile anger that this creature exuded was explosive and tangible. I was terrified more for my beloved pets than myself, because they were cowering and whimpering while lying on the ground in total submission. The creature eyed my animals and lunged towards Myrtle, hissing like a snake. Myrtle was whimpering, and the creature picked him up and threw him across the forest floor like a soccer ball, and thankfully he landed on 2 feet and bolted through the forest at record speed. Never have I seen Myrtle run away so fast. My other dog was now terrified and so incapacitated by fear that he just peed all over the place in terror. The creature grabbed Tiger by his mid-torso as if he weighed nothing and threw Tiger across the ground in fury, and I watched Tiger limping away, whimpering in pain. Now it was me left to face this ominous creature, and I just stood there, not knowing whether to run or to stand still. My instincts were not helping at all, because I had no idea what action I should take. Suddenly I uncoiled the gold necklace around my neck with its blue sapphire pendant, and I put it in the creature's hand. Why I did that, I have no idea. Initially he growled, and then he looked at the pendant, and the light of the sapphire sparkled as the fading beams of sunlight flickered through the trees and somehow lit up the jewel so that it looked quite resplendent. I saw this creature's rage transform into absolute fascination as his sausage-sized hands rubbed the stone with an open curiosity. In that moment I just ran away as fast as I could, tripping over fallen debris on the forest floor, twice over, and spraining my ankle in the process. I half expected to hear the creature racing after me, but all was still, and then I heard this long whistle, which at the time I thought was from a bird, but now I know differently. It clearly seemed my jewel had done the trick, and I had no idea why I had chosen it to wear it that day of all days. Someone was looking out for me. You see, I rarely ever wear jewelry, and what possessed me to wear it that day I do not know. But the creature loved it, that I'm sure of. After the incident, my ankle took a long time to heal, but the emotional trauma lasted far longer. As for my dogs, I promise you they did not eat for an entire week because of anxiety. But thankfully, with a little veterinary help, they are now right as rain, but refuse to go near that forest. Tiger did have to have some surgery on that leg that was badly fractured, but as far as I'm concerned, we got off lightly. I did not tell anyone about my story, as my husband advised me against it, and in my experience, he's usually right about these things like that. So as long as I remain anonymous, he's happy for me to share my story with you. After doing my research on the creature, I know without a shadow of doubt that the creature I saw was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or hairy man, if you like. As far as the mystery about the log in the road, I do not know if a Bigfoot did it or Mr. Dixon, so the jury is out on that one, I am afraid. Yet I do know that the Bigfoot was the one spying on me when I got out of my car. I do hope you enjoyed my story. I really loved your story, and I have to say to you, I'm just so amazed that you got away so scot-free. I mean, really, the dog only breaking his leg, that's nothing compared to what it could have been. And to think about giving the Bigfoot your sparkling pendant, that was genius. I mean, I have heard that Bigfoots are fascinated by anything sparkling. This isn't the first time I've heard that. And what made you think of doing that? I honestly don't know. Well done for thinking of that. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.